So let's go ahead and just assign this user avatar props like that, and now you should no longer be having any errors for passing this props here. But before we continue developing this, I actually want to create my avatar sizes here, right? So that's why we imported this too, CVA and type variant props. So let's go ahead and write const avatar sizes is CVA. Let's leave the first default classes to be completely empty, and then open an object and write variants size. The default size of this avatar is going to be H8 and W8, and the large is going to be H14 and W14. And now let's just give it some default variants here. So I wanted to always use the default size. Whoops, my apologies. I wanted to always use the default size unless user, or in our case developer, specifically tells us that they want a larger version of this avatar. So why am I doing this in this way? Why not just use any ternaries? Well, this is I got the inspiration from this from the actual ShadCN components. So if you go in any of our components like button, you can see that that's what they do. In the button variants here, this is how they define variants. And I think this is a much more structured way to do that rather than having a bunch of ternaries here and if else comparison with the props, right? So this is a much more structured way to do it. You can see how complex it is here, but our version in user avatar now, it's quite simple, right? So we have the variants, we define the type of variant which we want the developer to be able to control, which is the size. So they're going to have a new prop now for this user avatar, which is going to be called size, and inside they're going to be able to either pass default or large. And if they don't pass anything, then it's just going to fall back to default. So now we have to combine these avatar sizes with our existing props right here. And the way you can do that is by adding extends. So I'm going to do this in a new line. So extends variant props and then pass in type of avatar sizes. Like that. So we have these variant props here, which we imported, and then we use the type of avatar sizes. And now we don't have to manually define this size prop inside. Instead, it's going to read from this and it's automatically going to do the TypeScript for us. So if you add an extra large here, you know, something like this in the future, that's it. You don't have to change your props. It's automatically going to allow you, you can see now when I go to user avatar here in my user item, right? If I add a size prop, you can see how it allows me to add default, large, or extra large. So that's what we achieved right now. I'm going to remove extra large because we're not going to need it for this project, but I just want to show you how useful it is to do your variants for components in this way, right? Great. So now that we have this, let's go ahead and let's actually render all of these items. So username, image URL is live, show badge, and a size. And you can see how we didn't have size defined in here, but because we do extends right here, that reads the size props. So that's how cool this is. Now let's go ahead and define a little boolean const can show badge. So we are only going to show the live badge if the user explicitly tells us to show the badge, I mean the developer, and if the user for which this avatar is being referred to is actually live and streaming. Otherwise, we're not going to show that badge. So let's go ahead and give this div a class name of relative. And inside, let's add an avatar. So we have avatar imported right here. Make sure you have avatar, avatar fallback, and avatar image from components UI avatar here. Inside of here, I want to add the avatar image. And I want to give it a source of image URL and a class name of object cover. And about this avatar here, I want to give it a class name, which is going to be dynamic. So make sure you add cn from libutils here. And let's go ahead and give it first a dynamic if is live. In that case, we're going to add a little border around our avatar. So you can already see it right here, right? You can see our little avatar here. You can see how it looks. This is how it looks on desktop. So we're going to have a space for our username here. But on mobile, it's just like a little badge here. So this is how it looks when the user is offline, right? But now, if it is live, what we're going to do, add a little ring to ring rows 500 border and border background. So now if I go ahead back inside of my recommended right here, you can see that I set is live to true, and you can see how now I have a nice little red border right here. But if I change this to be is live false, you can see how the border disappears. Nice. So let's go ahead and enable this so you can clearly see how you're developing. So go back inside of the user avatar here. And now what I want to do is I want to apply those sizes which we talked about. So we can do that quite easily now by just using this avatar sizes constant inside of the CN library. So just pass in the avatar sizes, and inside of the object pass in whatever size the user provided. If they didn't provide anything, it's going to fall back to the default option. Great. And now if we fail to load an avatar image, or if it's taking some time, we also need an avatar fallback. So let's go ahead and render the username, the first letter, and then username length -1, which is the last letter, like this. Great. And now what we have to do is we have to go outside of the avatar and dynamically render that badge, right? So can show badge. Let's go ahead here and let's add a little div with a class name of absolute -bottom -3, left 1.5, transform, and minus translate -x 1.5. So these are just very specific values which I found to be the perfect for putting the live badge right in the middle of the avatar, right? So we actually cannot see this text right now because we need to create another component called a live badge. So let's go ahead and just quickly do that. I know you can't see anything now. I'm sorry for that. So let's go ahead and just quickly create that so we can see that. I maybe should have done this first. So inside of our components folder, create a new component called live badge.tsx. It's going to be very simple. This is just styling. So this live badge is going to actually show that little indicator. So import cn from libutils, create a little interface here, live badge props, and I want it to accept optional class name. Since we're going to be reusing this, you can see that I put it inside of our components folder. Sometimes we are also going to want to have it styled a bit more differently. So export const live badge here. Go ahead and assign live badge props and extract the class name. And in here, just return a div, which is going to say live, and go ahead and give this div a dynamic class name. So we're going to pass in the class name prop, and above it, I'm going to go ahead and write our classes. So that's going to be bg rows 500, text center, padding of 0.5, px of 1.5. Whoops. I think I switched my component. Let me just go back to components live badge. My apologies for that. So px 1.5, rounded md, uppercase, text 10 pixels, border background, font semi-bold, and tracking wide, not tracking, but tracking wide. Like that. That's it. That's our live badge. And now you can go back inside of the user avatar here, and let's go ahead inside this user avatar, and inside of here, go ahead and render the live badge component from /live badge, and you should be seeing the little live badge here. Or perhaps, oh, we cannot see it, yes, because we have to enable the prop for that. So just make sure you imported live badge from /live badge, and I'm going to change it to /components. And in order to see this badge, what we have to do is go inside of the user item, find the user avatar, and give it a prop show badge. And there we go. You can see how it looks now. It's huge, right? But later, when we use it in combination with a larger avatar, it's going to look a little bit better. So for this case, that's why I didn't even pass that prop in the user item component, because we're not going to need it. So you can just hide this for now, just confirm that it actually works for you, right? Great. So now that we have our user avatar, I want to go ahead and also create a skeleton for our user avatar. So whenever we are loading something, we have a nice little indicator of the appropriate size that this component is going to be when it loads. So let's go ahead and do interface user avatar skeleton props extends variant props, and the type of avatar size. So let me just collapse extends like this and just add an empty object at the end. Avatar sizes like this. And now let's do export const user avatar skeleton here, which is going to accept that size. So user avatar skeleton props like that, and in here we can get the size. So our skeleton is also going to be different depending on what size the developer passes. And very simply just return a skeleton. We have this imported from Shadcn UI, and let's go ahead and give it a default of rounded full, and then very simply just pass in the avatar sizes here to be the size component. That's it. That's going to be our avatar. So this is what we're going to show while something is loading. And in the end, it's going to use the avatar component. Great. So if you're having any trouble with this was a lot of code, you can always visit my GitHub directly. This is the finished user avatar. So you can just jump in here and see if something is missing, if you're having any problems. Now let's go back inside of our user item. And what we can do now is, besides this user avatar, we can also render the username, but we're only going to render the username if we are not collapsed. So make sure you put a little exclamation point here. If we are not collapsed, in that case, let's go ahead and render a paragraph username. And let's go ahead and give a class name of truncate. So if it's too long, it won't spoil the entire sidebar. And I think already, there we go. You can see how I have a nice little username here. But on mobile, it's hidden. Perfect. And last thing we're going to do, again, if we are not collapsed, and if we are live, I mean this specific user, then we're going to reuse that live badge, which we just created, and we used it inside of user avatar, but now we use it separately here. So that's why it was useful for us to create that inside of the components folder, because we're going to reuse it a lot of times. So let's go ahead and give this live badge a class name of MLAuto. So we use that little class name prop, which I was talking about, because sometimes it's going to be useful for us to add some specific styles without having to do the whole, div and then wrap that inside of this. This way is just simpler. And now if you expand, there we go. You have a nice little live badge, nice little indicator. Perfect. So it's very clear that this user in the sidebar is alive. And if you go back inside of your recommended here and change is live to false, you can see how it looks on mobile, and you can also see how it looks on desktop. So now let's go ahead and create the user item skeleton, because we just did the user avatar skeleton, right? So now let's go ahead and create the user item. So make sure you are in the user item here, and go ahead and write export const user item skeleton. Go ahead and return a list element here and give it a class name of flex items center gap x4 px3 and py2. So these are just some specific values that I know will look good. A lot of you sometimes write to me and tell me that I'm not exactly clearing up why I use specific class names. A big part of that is definitely my fault. I try to do better at that, at explaining my class names, but sometimes it's just trial and error. I already finished this project before, obviously, that's how I know what to write. And some specific CSS values here, I just tried a bunch of times until it looked good. Sometimes it needed a little bit more space, sometimes a little bit less space. So that's how I get these specific values. There isn't any logic behind this, right? I just go ahead and try. And of course, I try to be consistent with the overall spacings that I use throughout my project, just in case you were wondering. All right. And now let's add our little skeleton component here. And let's go ahead and we have this imported. Great. So now let's give this skeleton a class name of min h 32 pixels. And let's give it a min width of 32 pixels as well, and rounded full. So this is actually representing our user avatar skeleton. Perhaps we can actually use the user avatar skeleton here. We're going to try it out in a second. So let's do it like this for now, and then we're going to see if maybe we can actually reuse that from the actual user avatar. You can see that in here we have that exact skeleton, but I believe we're going to need some specific sizes right here just for this edge case, where it's just going to look a bit better. So give this div below that a class name of flex1, and what this following skeleton is going to represent is the username right here. So we're going to kind of give it some class name h6 like this. So that's the size that I want to give it. All right, so now we have our user item skeleton here. And what we can do now is go inside of our recommended here. And now we can finally create recommended skeleton, which is going to be very simple because we have all the necessary skeletons. So just go ahead and return an unordered list here with a class name of px2. And inside, we're going to create a mock array. So we're going to pretend like we are loading 3 users, right? And let's just forget this first index here. My apologies, you have to open another parenthesis inside of the map here. So you can just skip the first parameter and go immediately to the index here and just render user item skeleton. And make sure you import user item skeleton from user item like that. And let's go ahead and simply give it a key of I like that. So that's it. We created our recommended skeleton very, very fast. And what we have to do now is we have to go ahead and add that to our sidebar skeleton right here, because this is where we are actually loading our users. So go inside of sidebar index.tsx right here, and let's go ahead and do export const sidebar skeleton. And I know you're kind of not even seeing the result of what we're typing now with these skeletons, but I promise in just a second when we actually add the suspense and include this skeleton, it's gonna be clear why we did it this way. So what I want to do now is do this wrapper, and we know that that is an aside property, right? So let's go ahead and do that here. So it's gonna be aside, and it's not gonna be anything dynamic. So it's just gonna be a class name of fixed left 0 flex call. It's going to have a width of 70 pixels automatically on mobile, but on large it's going to be a width of 60. So this skeleton is actually going to fix that flickering which we have right now. You can see how for a second when I refresh here, it loads the desktop mode, right? And only then it goes to the mobile mode. So this skeleton is going to fix that, because automatically it's going to load only a small skeleton. And then when it loads, at that time, our use effect with matching query, with media query, is already going to trigger. So there's not going to be this flickering effect here. So on large, the width is 60. We're going to have h full, bg background, border r, and border is specifically going to be 2D 2E35. And let's also give it a z index of 50. Also, just to clear this up, so this with 60 is larger than this with 70, because this is a specific value that I'm telling it exactly 70 pixels, but this is 15 rem, which is 240 pixels. So the reason I'm doing this specifically here is because I'm not sure if Tailwind has the exact width, which is 70 pixels. Maybe it has, maybe I could have just wrote like width 10, which I think then is 40 pixels. I don't know, maybe it has, but it's just simpler for me this way. So just if you're having any confusion, why is it smaller on large? It's not, it's bigger on large, it's 240 pixels. And then what we can do inside is we can add the recommended skeleton like that. So make sure you import recommended skeleton from recommended. And now what we can do is go back inside of our layout. So inside of browse layout here where we render the sidebar, and we're going to wrap it in suspense from React. So make sure you import suspense from React here. And then we're going to give it a fallback to use, to use the sidebar skeleton like that. And you can import sidebar skeleton from sidebar right here. So make sure you have that. And now Let's go ahead and see if we seem to be having some errors here. So let's just see what that is and why exactly is it happening. Let me just go ahead and debug this. I'll be back with you in a second and tell you what I found out. All right, this is what I'm gonna do. For now, I'm just gonna leave it like this. So obviously we are getting some error, but it only happens when we have suspense. Oh, now it doesn't happen. When I expand on desktop, it doesn't happen. But on mobile, oh, so it only happens on mobile. On desktop, it seems to be fine. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and debug this in the next module because I wanna end this part for now. It's already 40 minutes long. And I'm going to tell you what I found and how I debugged this. But for now, just leave it as it is. So add a suspense and a fallback of sidebar skeleton. And I think you should be kind of seeing that. What we can do is we can add a little delay for you to see this. So let's go inside of our lib, inside of the recommended service here. And you can add, just before you load the users, this. So await new promise and timeout the resolve for 5,000 milliseconds. And this should make it load for 5 seconds. And there we go. You can see how for 5 seconds we have a nice little skeleton here. And after 5 seconds, it loads. So just make sure to remove this later. But on mobile, it seems to work on mobile as well now. I'm not exactly sure why we are getting that hydration error. It could be just cache. If I remove this from get recommended, so it loads instantly. Yeah, now it's super fast, so we're not even seeing it. And here we're having an error. Okay, that's interesting. That's what I'm gonna debug in the next module. But for now, I hope I kind of made it clear what we did with this layout here. Make sure you have the suspense and the sidebar skeleton. And basically, we built from the lowest component to the highest component, so we can easily reuse those skeletons with recommended skeleton, then the user skeleton, all the way to the user avatar skeleton. So that's the way we're gonna do all of our components. So all of them have reusable skeletons, and then we can easily build larger skeleton layouts for better loading states. Great, so leave it as it is for now. Perhaps you're not even getting this error. Maybe this is something that just I am having, but I'm not sure. I'm gonna go ahead and debug that in the next module. For now, great job. You finished loading recommended users here. And after we finish this bug, we're gonna go ahead and improve this recommended service a little bit so it shows more relevant users. Alright, so now I want to resolve this hydration error. It looks like this is happening only on mobile mode, and it looks like it only started happening after we've wrapped our sidebar inside of a suspense, if I'm correct. So if we go into layout here, once we added this suspense, these errors started happening. So if we go and remove this suspense, then these errors don't happen, right? So I can't tell you exactly how come suspense triggers those errors, but I can tell you that we definitely do have some hydration mismatch here. And here's another thing you might be wondering. All right, why does this happen on mobile, but when I expand to desktop, why is it perfectly fine? How come this is working as intended? Well, that's because inside of our store use sidebar, we have collapsed false by default. If I move it to true by default and try this again on mobile mode, you can see that we no longer have any errors, right? But if I expand on desktop mode, then I have the errors because you can see how there's a visible shift for a second. So that shift is the mismatch between server-side rendering and client-side rendering. So make sure you bring this collapsed back to false because that's how we want it. So on desktop, you should not be having any hydration errors, but then on mobile, you should definitely be having a hydration error here. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to ensure that specific parts of our application only show on client mode. So on server-side rendering, I'm just going to show a loading skeleton. And here's how I'm going to do that. So first, I'm going to create one more skeleton that we need. So go inside of the app, browse, components, sidebar toggle.tsx. This is one of the problematic components. As you can see, it heavily relies on this collapsed state, which we've just confirmed that is obviously causing hydration mismatch between our server-side rendering, which does not have access to this, and our client-side rendering, which has access to this. And thus, they create different states, and that is called a mismatch between the server and the client. Now, this isn't exactly the most dangerous thing to happen. I don't think it will break your app, but still, I don't want to go ahead and proceed with these errors that we have. So let's go ahead inside of this toggle component, and first let's create a skeleton for it, which we're going to use to display to the server-side rendering, and only then we're going to go ahead and do all of this, right? All of this dynamic stuff with the collapsed boolean. So let's do export const toggle skeleton. And let's go ahead and let's return a div with a class name of padding 3, PL 6, margin bottom of 2, hidden on mobile devices, flex on large devices, items center, justify between, and full width. So that's our div that's happening like right here. And then what we'll do is we're gonna go ahead and render a skeleton for this text and render a skeleton for this button. So inside of here, first we need a skeleton for our text. So make sure you import skeleton from @/components UI skeleton here. And go ahead and give it a class name of h6 and width of 100 pixels, which is an appropriate width of our text here. And below that, add another skeleton, which is going to be our button. So it's going to have the same width and the same height, like this. And this just by itself did not fix anything. We're still getting the exact same errors because we are not using this anywhere right now. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to go inside of our wrapper component, which is obviously very problematic because, again, it shifts our entire layout based on this use sidebar hooks and the collapsed state, which is only available in the client, which means that server-side rendering has no idea what's going on here and doesn't know how to match what is expecting on the client and what it expected during server-side rendering. So this is the first thing I'm going to do. First thing I want to do is fix this layout flickering which is happening. So in here I define that default width is 60%, but that's not true, right? That's only true if we are on large devices. The actual default width is 70 pixels, which is this collapsed width. So now when I refresh, you can see how we don't have that layout change, but now we have this weird content which is sticking out for a second. So the next thing I'm going to do is ensure that this entire thing, our wrapper, only renders on the client. And during the server-side rendering, it's going to render some skeletons instead. So this is how we are gonna do that. So let's go ahead and add const useState from React. So make sure you import useState from React. And while you're here, also import useEffect from React. And I'm gonna move them to the top here. This is one of the methods which you can ensure that you only render something on the client and not on the server, because this use client doesn't mean skip server-side rendering. This means this is a client component. You are still going to do server-side rendering on here, but it is not a server component. So server-side components and server-side rendering are two different things, right? So what we're going to do is add isClient and set isClient here and give it a default value of false. That's what server-side rendering is. By default, it's not client. And then we're going to add a useEffect. And here's the cool thing about useEffects. They can only happen and execute on the client. Server-side rendering has no access to useEffect. So this is the perfect place for us to switch this variable from false to true. Set isClient is now true. And then in here, we're gonna write if isClient. For now, just return null like this. And now if you try and refresh here, if it is not client, my apologies. So make sure you put an exclamation point here. So if it is not a client, completely skip the rendering of this problematic component. And look at what happens now. I no longer have any errors, but the solution is kind of ugly, isn't it? Because even on desktop, our entire sidebar disappears for a second, so it kind of doesn't make sense that we built all of those nice skeletons just for us not to even see them now. But at least we got rid of our hydration error. But don't worry, there is a very simple solution for this now. So instead of rendering null, what I'm going to do is I'm going to render this exact aside element, and I'm going to go ahead and copy this default class names here. So give it class name and paste those. So they are exactly what you just saw here. As you can see, it matches. But we're not going to do this collapsed thing at all because this is server-side rendering. And then inside, I'm going to render the toggle skeleton like that, and I'm going to render the recommended skeleton. So make sure you import toggle skeleton and recommended skeleton from toggle and recommended respectively. Go ahead and save this, and now if you refresh, there we go. You can see how now there's no flickering. Well, I mean it is, but it's from skeleton flickering. That's good. We don't want that weird layout shift. And on the mobile it looks good as well. So you can clearly see that we no longer have those errors now. Perfect. And let's see if there's something else we can do here. So we just resolved those errors of ours, but I want to do one more thing. Inside of my sidebar index, we have the recommended skeleton here. What I want to do instead is also add a toggle skeleton above it. So you kind of have to understand what we did here. So make sure you import toggle skeleton from toggle as well. What we just did here is we have two types of skeletons showing up. So the first one is inside of our suspense right here. So this skeleton will show while this get recommended is loading. And can we bring back that promise? We can. So you can write this promise as well, and you can save it. And now when I refresh, you can see how for 5 seconds I have that loading skeleton. But don't confuse that skeleton, which comes from our from our suspense, with this skeleton from our wrapper right here. This is a different skeleton, so this one takes care of server-side rendering and nothing else. So those are two different skeletons. I know this is a little bit confusing now, but you know, server-side rendering, server components, client components, these are kind of a new way of thinking when working with Next.js, right? One great article that you can read is The Perils of Hydration. Go ahead and Google that and read that entire article, and it will do a much better job of explaining what's actually going on than I am. And even better, it shows you examples of this happening in real big websites like Airbnb. So they also have these issues, and they also fix them in similar ways. So this is not some dirty hack that we are doing here, right? You don't have to worry about that. Perfect. So now we should no longer be having our errors, and we have clear loading states here, both during the server-side rendering and then during the actual suspense, which is loading the information. So before we end this, just make sure that you remove this snippet right here. And you can also store it somewhere because it's quite useful if you want to test your skeletons and see how they look. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove this for now. Great. So again, I'm testing on here. We have no hydration errors. When I expand my screen, no hydration errors here as well. Let's go ahead and test. Oh, it seems like we do have a little issue here, which I did not notice. So let's go ahead and see what's going on with this. So when we click here, it looks like this is not collapsing back. And I think that is because when we went inside of our wrapper here, right here, oh yes, we gave it this values. Yes, this is incorrect. I have to correct myself. I told you that v60, which width of 60, which was here, is not correct, but it actually is, because in here we control width differently. So go ahead and bring this back to just be with 60 and be entirely controlled by this. I believe that now we're no longer going to be having that issue. That is fixed. And now let's again test our hydration errors. On desktop, it's fine. On mobile, it is fine as well. Perfect. Great job. So just one more time to recap. Inside of our wrapper, we actually didn't change anything in here. So we left this exactly as it was. But we added a little isClient here. And you can do this even prettier. You can maybe wrap this inside of curly brackets. At least I prefer it that way, like that. So in here, we take care of that hydration error, right? And we added a little toggle skeleton so it looks even better. And here's one more information if you need it. So I purposely wrote this like this so you understand what's going on behind. But you remember that inside of our, I think it's the container component, we installed a package called usehooks. Usehooks actually has a hook for this as well. So you don't have to write this every time you have some hydration errors in your project. You can actually do this as well. You can import use isClient from usehooks.ts like that. And then you can completely replace all of these codes. You can just write const isClient, use isClient, and remove this use effect. And it's gonna be the exact same thing. As you can see here, no errors on mobile mode, and when I expand, no errors on desktop mode, and everything is still working exactly as we intended. So if you want to, you can use isClient. You wrote it yourself first, so you know how it works, but I think it's shorter and it's even better to do it this way. Great, so you can go ahead and visit my GitHub if you're not sure or if you're still having those hydration errors. But also, if you cannot resolve these hydration errors for any reason, they're not going to stop you from continuing to develop this project. As I've said, I don't think they break apps exactly. Well, some could possibly, but I think this one that we had isn't that dangerous. But still, I don't want to proceed without fixing that first because it just looks bad, especially if you're going to put this on your resume or show it to someone. So this way we got rid of those errors. Great job. Now let's go ahead and let's modify our recommend service so it doesn't include the currently logged in user. So this is one of the users that should not be shown in the recommended tab because that is myself right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back inside of my recommended service here. So make sure you are inside. It's located inside of our lib folder here. And we already have the get self function. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to define the user ID as default to be undefined. And then I'm going to go ahead and open a try and catch block. In the catch, I will let the user ID be null like this. Otherwise, I'm going to attempt to get the user ID by first getting the self from await get self, which we have imported right here, and we have created it here. So we use the current user, and then we fetch the user into the database here. And then we're going to assign the user ID to be self.id. The reason I'm putting this inside of a try and catch block is because our auth service throws errors and breaks functions if it doesn't work. So this way, I mean, you can go ahead and change this if you don't like it. You can put this entire thing in a try catch to encapsulate it. But I wanted to break the app if someone is not authorized, right? This is my choice of design for this one. And because of that, I have to do optional stuff like this. All right, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to dynamically do the query here. So I'm going to define users to be an empty array like this. And then I will assign users like that. So what I have to do is check if I have the user ID, and in that case, I will do one query. Otherwise, I'm going to do this simple query. So that's what we're going to do. So this is going to be for the logged out user in the else here. And inside of here, we're going to go ahead and create one for logged in users. So that one is going to go users, await db user find many. And let's go ahead and let's give it order by inside of here, and I'm going to order them by created at descending as well. But I'm also going to go ahead and add a where clause. So in here, add where, and we're going to write not ID user ID. So we exclude the current user. So now, as you can see, since I'm logged in, I have no recommended users for me. And I also don't have the label recommended Because inside of our recommended component, if you remember, so inside of the sidebar right here, we have the recommended component. If our data is empty, we don't even show the label, right? So that's why this is empty. So if you want to see the users now, what you have to do is sign out of your account like this. And then as a logged out user, you can see them. But if you go ahead and log in, it's not going to work. So this is what I want to do next. I want you to create another user account here. So let's go ahead and fire up all the hooks we need here. So make sure you have npm run dev running. And inside of a new terminal, go ahead and run that ngrok command with your stable URL, or if you don't have a stable URL, you can run just ngrok http 3000 like that, and that's going to generate a completely random URL, but then you also have to change that in the webhook. So I'm going to go ahead and use this, and I will also show you again where you can find this URL. So you have to go inside of ngrok.com, go inside of Cloud Edge, domains, and in here you have your domain. And in here you have a little button, start a tunnel, and this will show you the command you can copy, and then you can safely paste that right here as I'm doing right now. But remember, when you copy it like this, it's on the wrong port. So when you copy it, make sure you change this number 80 to 3000 so your port is running on the correct version like that. Perfect. And just go ahead and ensure that you have the matching webhook in Clerk. So inside of your webhooks, inside of Clerk, you should have that domain, Evolved Humbly Gopher for me. And you can see that that domain matches this Evolved Humbly Gopher, right? So make sure you have that running, and you can go ahead and copy this URL and just confirm in your new tab here. So I'm going to close the ngrok now, and there we go. You can see that I have the same page right here as it is on localhost. Great. So it means that our webhook is now running. So make sure you have both of that. And I want you to go ahead and create a new account. So click login here and go ahead and create a new user, which you haven't done before. So I created a new user, and I'm going to give him a name of Antonio, and I'm going to click continue, and there we go. Now I'm in this new user here. You can see that I'm called Antonio, and now in my recommended I have that other user. So this time it's not empty even when I'm logged in, and if I log out completely, I'm gonna see two users inside. So go back inside of that one of the users. It doesn't matter which one, because now we're going to implement the follow functionality. Great, so make sure you're logged in, and what we're going to build now is this page 404, but the URL is localhost 3000 and slash the name of that user. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go inside of my app folder, inside of browse right here, and what we have to do is create a new folder, which is going to be called inside of square brackets username. Like that, and I'm going to explain what the square brackets mean. So go inside of here and create page.tsx, and let's go ahead and call this user page like that, and just return a div user page like that. And when you save, make sure you have a default export, and let me zoom in. You should no longer be having an error. Instead, it should say user page here. And when you click here, you're on the home page. And when you click here, you're on the user page. And you can see how this stays highlighted because we have that little check is active instead of the user item component, I believe. Great, so this is now working, and let me just briefly explain what does this username in square brackets do. So this tells the router that this is dynamic part of the URL, so it's not hard-coded, and that means that inside of this page.tsx here, we can access that part of the URL. So I'm going to quickly show you how to do that. So I'm going to create an interface user page props to include params, and those params are going to have a username, which is a string like that. So how do I know that username is going to be inside of the params? Well, because that's the name of my variable right here. So I can name this anything. It doesn't matter, right? This is just part of the URL and how the URL is going to show that inside of our params here. So because it's named username inside of square brackets, this doesn't literally mean username. It means whatever value it's passed in that part of the URL. And then when you have that, you can assign that user page props here, extract the params, and then you can write user params.username like that. And there we go. Now I'm on user something else, exactly as I wanted it. So in here it matches, in here it matches, and inside of my URL it matches. Great. Now what we have to do is we have to create the Prisma schema for our followers and following structure. And also one thing that I kind of forgot to talk about. So once you create that new user, make sure that you have them inside of your database, right? Ensure that this was all correct. So I'm going to open a new terminal and run npx Prisma Studio here. And that should open localhost 555. And there we go. I have 2 users inside of my database. So ensure that you have 2 users as well. If you don't have 2 users, what you can do is remove all of the users. So just click this and delete all users, then go inside of Clerk and remove all users from there as well, and just start from the beginning, right? And also don't worry if sometimes you get errors inside of here from webhooks. That is because when Clerk webhooks fail, they do something called a retry, and they're going to keep retrying until they succeed or until it reaches the maximum amount of retries. So during development, that can happen, right? Because you might forget to turn on your webhook or your local tunnel, right? You might try and create an account, and then the webhooks are going to get out of sync. So it's not a horrible thing to happen, but if you keep seeing those errors, even though everything is okay in your database, that means everything is okay. No need to worry. Great, so just ensure you have 2 users inside of your database here. And now what I want to do is I want to go back inside of my Prisma schema.prisma right here. And let's go ahead and let's create the follow model. So just below the model user, create model follow. Let's go ahead and give it an ID, which is going to be a type of string, and our primary ID with a default value of UUID. Give it a follower ID, which is a string, a following ID, which is also a string. And now let's create relations with the user model. So a follower is going to be a user with a relation with a name of following. And fields for that are going to be follower ID. So all of this is in one line, right? References are going to go to the ID. And on delete, we're going to cascade this model. So let me zoom out so you can see. Oh, it's a very long line. I don't know if this helps you, but this is how it's supposed to be in one line, right? So follower, user, relation, name, following, fields, follower ID. So we work with this field and we reference to the ID of the user right here. And if user gets deleted, we will also delete this relation with them, right? So let me zoom back in. And one more thing that you need to do here is go inside of the user model, and now you have to create an equivalent relation back. So after bio, go ahead and add the following. So you're going to add following like this, and then you're going to say follow at relation following like that. So follow the follow model, which can be an array, and array relation of following. And there we go. Now we no longer have an error here, but what we do have is a warning. So we have to create an index. So at that index here, go ahead and write follower ID. And there we go. The error is gone. And now we have to create an equivalent relation for following, right? So following is also a user with a relation which we are going to call followed by. Fields are going to be the following ID. So that was the follower before, but now it's following ID. References are going to go to the ID, and on delete is going to go to cascade. So I will zoom out again so you can see it's very similar, right? So this is for the follower or the ones that this model is following, and this is for the ones that this model is followed by. This one uses the follower ID, and this one uses the following ID. They both reference to the ID, and they will both get deleted if the main user that this refers to is deleted. So just as we created a back relation for the following, we now have to create a back relation for the followed by. So let me go back in here and write followed by, I believe, or yes, like that, and let's give it again a follow model, but the relation is gonna be followed by, like that. And now we no longer have an error here, but we do have a warning. So let's go ahead and add an index to be following ID. Is it following ID? And there we go, no more errors. And besides this, let's also go ahead and let's add at unique. So we create a unique combination of follower ID and following ID. And that's also going to create an index for us for faster querying. And besides this, let's also create a created at, which is date time default now. And let's add updated at, which is date time updated at, like that. Great. And now that you added this model here, what you have to do is you have to run your Prisma commands, right? So make sure you don't close any of your terminals here. Open a new one. And let's go ahead and write npx prisma generate. So this will add it to our local environment. And then npx prisma db push, like that. That's going to push it to the main database, in my case on PlanetScale. And there we go. And after you do this, go ahead and restart your app. So find where you do npm run dev and do npm run dev again, so you have new models inside. Otherwise, you're going to get errors during development. So once you've done that, just refresh your page like this, so everything is up to date. Great. And now what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to create a follow service, right? So let's go and close everything here. Let's go inside of lib and let's create a new file, follow service.ts, like this. Great. So let's go ahead first and let's check if we are following a user. So I think that will be a useful util for us. So let's import database and let's go ahead and let's import get self. So import database and get self, and I'm just going to change those two to use lib. And then let's export const is following user is going to be an asynchronous function which accepts the ID of the user we are trying to follow. And then let's open a try and catch block, and in the catch block we're just going to return false. So if anything goes wrong, we're going to fall back to telling them that they are not following this user. So now let's go ahead and attempt to get self, and then let's get the other user using await db user find unique, where we have a matching ID of users. If we don't have the other user, in that case, let's throw new error, user not found. And that's by itself going to return false here in the catch block. And now let's go ahead and check if other user.id equals self ID. So if the user we are trying to check whether we are following equals ourselves, no need to even search through the database. We're just going to fall back to true. So we are always going to be a follower of ourselves, right? And this way, we're not going to be able to follow ourselves either. And now let's go ahead and do const existing follow to be await database.follow, which we now have, .find first, where follower ID is self.id and following ID is other user.id. And then we're just going to return whatever is the result of that and turn it into a boolean by adding double exclamation points existing follow, like this. So we find the existing follow in the follow model by passing the follower ID to be the person that is checking whether they are following, and the following ID to be that user they're trying to check their relation with. Great. So now that we have this is following user, it's going to be useful for us to create another service called user service. So let's go ahead inside of the lib folder and create user service. And in here, let's do export const get user by ID. Sorry, get user by username. Let's do that one first. So because that's how our URLs are created, right? So get user by username is going to be an asynchronous function which accepts the username, which is a string. And we're going to attempt to get the user, so await db, which you can import from ./db.user.find unique, where the username matches. So as simple as that, and just return the user. And I'm going to change this to be @/libdb. So now we have get user by username, and what we can do now is go inside of our app folder, browse username page.tsx here. And now that we have this username params, let's turn this into an asynchronous function here. And let's go ahead and write const user to be await get user by username and pass in params.username like that. And if we don't have a user, we're going to throw not found from next navigation. So that's a cool little thing that you can do. And you don't even have to return this because this will return by itself, right? So make sure you import not found from next navigation. And then you can use this user to show the username. So user.username, and let me do it like this. So I'm going to create a div with a class name flex call gap y4. So just some temporary styling here, and let's turn this into a paragraph, and let's go ahead and give it something else. So this is going to be the username, and then this is going to be the user ID, and that's going to go to user.id like that. And now when you look at my page here, for user something else, the username is something else, and I have the user ID, so this is directly from my database. But if I try and change my URL to something that doesn't exist, I have a 404 page exactly as we wanted. So go ahead and click on this page here, and let's continue to work here. And now what we can do is we can also check whether we are following the user or not. So after this has been confirmed that this user can be fetched from the database, let's add const is following to be await is following user, and you can import is following user from @/lib follow service, and go ahead and pass in user.id like that. And then below that we're going to add is following like this. And let's go ahead and just see why this is not working. So is following is not rendering anything for me. Let's go inside of the is following user here and check why that is happening. It should return true or false. Maybe it's because it's not serialized. So if I turn this into a string, will it then change? No. Oh yeah, it looks like it's because of string things. So render it like this. Open backticks and then render it like that. There we go. So now it's working. So we have the username, the ID, and is following is false. So now what we're going to do is we're going to create an action to actually follow the user. So we have to go back inside of our follow service, and after is following user, go ahead and create follow user action, which is an asynchronous function which accepts the ID of that user, right? And let's go ahead and attempt to get self. So await get self, and no need to put this in a try and catch block like we did with this one, because this one is important to be inside of try catch, because logged out users can run this function, and this function is always going to break for logged out users. So we will just fall back to telling them that they are not following anyone, right? But for an action to follow user should not even be initiated by someone who's logged out. So we don't care if any error gets in the way, we need to break the function, right? Everything here must work. So now let's attempt to get the other user using await db user find unique, where we have a matching ID. If there is no other user, go ahead and throw new error. We're gonna say user not found. Now let's see if the user that this user is trying to follow is themselves. So if other user ID is equal to self ID, we're going to throw new error, cannot follow yourself. All right. And now let's check if this user is already following another user. So const existing follow is await db follow find unique, where follower ID is self.id and following ID is other user.id. And instead of find unique, let's do find first, like this. So this function will work. And if we have an existing follow, let's throw new error, already following. All right, and if all of those tests have passed, let's do const follow to be await db follow create data follower ID is self ID and following ID is other user.id. And let's also include following true and follower true. So we're gonna have access to who was followed and by whom in our result from this function. And let's return follow. Great, so now we have our function to follow the user. So what I want to do now is I want to do a little practice with server actions here. I have a more in-depth tutorial about server actions in my Trello clone if you are interested in that. And the Next.js documentation has great explanation and even a little course on server actions. So you can take that if you're very interested in them, but we're going to do the most basic version of them here. So inside of your username in here, let's create underscore components and let's go ahead and create a new file, actions.tsx, like that. Let's mark them as use client and let's export const actions here. And let's return a div, or we can actually return a button component. So import that and let's write follow and let's give it a variant of primary. All right, and now go back to the page and below this add the actions from /components actions, which we just created. Great. And now you can see how I have a huge button here which says follow for that user. So let's go ahead and do a little crash course on actions here. So actions are built-in RPCs which can replace, they allow us to do API-less mutations. So the same way that server components allow us to do API-less querying, server actions allow us to do the equivalent but for mutation. So we don't even need to create a post route for this, which is something you might have been expecting. With server actions, you don't need to do that. So this is built in RPC. So let me show you how we're gonna do that. I'm gonna close everything and I'm just go ahead and click on some random item here so you can create a new folder called actions like this, and then inside create a new file follow.ts like that. And what you're gonna do here is you're gonna first mark this as use server like that. So it's now not gonna be, well, first it's going to work, and second, this is what ensures the security so that this actually behaves like an API route and doesn't accidentally spill into some JavaScript bundle, right? So it's protected. And now let's do export const on follow to be an asynchronous function which accepts the ID. And let's go ahead and open a try and catch block. And inside this catch block, I'm actually going to throw new error, internal error here. So just like I would on my API route. And then inside of try here, what we're going to do for now is just console log I am the same as an API call. Right? Well, obviously it's not the same, but just to help you understand. And you can also pass in the ID from here, right? And now let me show you how you can call this action from a client component. You can also do it from server components, but I'm going to focus on client components for this case. So going to browse username components actions in here. And now what you want to do is you want to import that onFollow from your actions here. And then let's do const onClick here to call onFollow. And let's pass in 1, 2, 3 like that. And let's give it an onClick here. onClick. And go ahead and open your terminal and prepare this. So where you're running npm run dev. And now, if I'm not mistaken, when you click follow here, there we go. You can see that it's logged in my server. So just like this would have been an API call, this is logged in the server from our client component. So that's RPC, right? Those are server actions. And now you might be wondering, can you do pending and loading states with that? Yes, you do. And React actually has built-in hooks for this. Yeah, an important thing for you to understand. So server components and like this server actions, they're not necessarily a Next.js thing. They are a React thing. It's just that they perform very well inside of Next.js because Next.js seems to be built around server components, right? So what you can do here is import use transition from React like this. So in here, let's go ahead and extract is pending and start transition, and then wrap this inside of start transition like that. And if you're wondering what does this do now, well, now you can use this is pending on disable, right? And now if you try and click follow, you can see how for a second the button gets disabled, right? Of course, it's very fast because all we do is throw back a console log, but you can see that this start transition allows us to get a proper is pending without us manually doing, set is loading to true and then do a dot finally or whatever else we do to get that. So we can do that quite easily using use transition and server actions. Great. So what I want to do now is just a couple of more things. So go back inside of your page.tsx here, and let's use this is following, and let's pass it as a prop here. So is following to be is following like that. Go inside of actions here, create an interface, actions props. Is following is going to be a boolean. And go ahead and give them here. So actions props is following. Like that. And then go ahead and I'm just going to collapse these 3 attributes for this button here. So give it a disabled if is already following the user or if it's pending, like that. Great. So by default, this should be turned on, but what you can do is you can try and go to your username. So copy your logged in username and change it inside of your URL. And now, as you can see, it's disabled. Why? And you can see that it says is following true because that is ourselves, right? And inside of our follow service, inside of the lib here, we have follow service here. You can see that if it's ourselves, not follow user, sorry, this one is following user. So if it's ourselves, we always return true. So that's why this exists, even though in our database, we don't actually have a record that we're following this user. But I think that's a common practice to do, to just disable the user from trying to follow themselves. So now go back to this other user where you should be able to click on this follow button here. Great. And now what I want to do is go inside of these actions here, and I want to create a little success and error messages so we can go ahead and play around with that. So go inside of your terminal here, and I'm gonna go ahead and open a new terminal and add npm install sonar like this. This is gonna be a package we're gonna use to trigger toasts. So now go inside of your app folder, inside of your layout here, and you can just go ahead and import toaster from sonar like this. And then just go ahead and wrap and add a toaster somewhere like this. So I'm gonna add it inside of the body here. Actually, we can do it inside of theme provider maybe, just above the children. And one more thing that you can also do here is give it a theme and a position. So I actually gonna keep my toasts in a light mode because they just look better and they're more noticeable and they're very small, right? So just like our hints, you can see that our hints are in light mode, right? They're not dark because they're more visible this way. And it's the same thing for toasts. So I'm gonna give them a light theme and I'm gonna give them a position of bottom center like this because that's where we're gonna have the most space, right here in the middle and on the bottom. Great, so just add that toaster from the Sonar package which we just installed. And now let's go back inside of Browse Username Components Actions. And you can just as easily as you would in an API request, you can just as easily chain .then and .catch for server actions. So go ahead and import toast from Sonar. So I'm going to move it here to the top and add toast.success followed the user, right? Or .catch toast.error, something went wrong. Like that. And let's go ahead and try this out now. So when I click follow, there we go. It says followed the user, right? Perfect. And we can try an error as well by going inside of the actions follow here. And let's throw new error something. And now if you try, you can see that we have an error. Great. So both of our use cases are working. So now what I want to do is also add one more prop to these actions, and that's going to be the user ID. So it's a string and user ID here. Now go inside of your page for the username where we render all of this stuff and pass in the user ID to be the current user.id. Like that. So now our actions know what to send inside of this onFollow function, right? So let's go ahead and send that here on follow. And then let's go ahead and actually develop this follow function. So instead of this console log, what we're going to do is do const followed user to be await follow user from our libfollow service like this and pass in the ID of that user. And then, well, let's immediately do this. So what we can do from server actions, this is a cool thing. We can revalidate our paths, meaning that we can kind of refresh server components so that they instantly have the newest data. Because think of how you would usually have to do this, right? So in here, we just loaded this is following state, which says false. And then inside of the actions, we follow the user, and usually you would have to like update your global Redux store for this exact page and change optimistically, right, a mutation from is following false to true. But with server actions and server components, you can just revalidate the path, and then it's going to be quite easier. So let's go ahead and do this. Import revalidate path from next cache, and then let's go ahead and do the following. First path I want to reinvalidate is the global root path, like that. So my sidebar gets updated because later we're going to have, alongside list of recommended users, we're going to have a list of followed users. So this revalidate path will refresh that and recache that, right? And then if we have the followed user from this function, because remember inside of follow user here, what we do is we return this new follow model which we created, and we also include the users which were followed and which followed that user. So we're going to have information like username, ID, and that's going to be useful for us because we need to revalidate the path that goes slash and then the name of the user, right? So it should be /Antonio or slash something else in my case. So go ahead and let's do that dynamically by using the followed user dot following dot username, like that. Great. And in the end, return followed user. Great. So now we have this function. Let's go inside of actions here. And what I want to do next is I want to add a data here, access to the data, as you can see it right here. And let's go ahead and let's dynamically write this. So I'm going to say followed the user, or let's say you are now following, and then write data.following dot username, like that. I believe it's dot following. Let me just check. Yes, it's dot following. Perfect. So I think that we are ready to try this out. I'm going to prepare my Prisma Studio. So npx Prisma Studio, like this. And let me just open that on localhost 5555, like this. You can see that in my follow model, I don't have absolutely anything inside. So what should happen is when I click on this follow, I should be creating that model. So let's click follow. It's disabled, meaning it's loading, and it says you are now following someone else. And you can see how it immediately revalidated this path. So this changed from is following false to is following true, and now this button is entirely disabled, right? And let's finally check my Prisma Studio, and in here, there we go, we have a new follow model with the correct follower ID and correct following ID. Perfect. So our follow system works great. So what I want to create now is an option to unfollow the user, and just for fun, let's try and not disable this if we are following the user. So what should happen now is an error. So when I click follow, there we go, something went wrong exactly as we expected because we are already following this user. Perfect. So what we have to create now is a function to unfollow the user. So we have to go back inside of our follow service. So let's go inside of lib follow service right here, and it's going to be very similar to this function follow user. So let's write export const unfollow user is again going to accept the ID, which is a string, and it's also going to be an asynchronous function. Let's go ahead and get self from await get self, which we already have imported here. Let's get the other user. So await db user find unique where ID matches, right? We're going to check if the user we are trying to unfollow exists. So if the other user does not exist, we throw new error, user not found. Now let's check if we are trying to do some action on our own user. So if other user and self has the exact same ID, we're going to throw new error here and say cannot unfollow yourself. To be honest, we can't even follow ourselves, but that's something only we know, right? Basically, we don't want to create or delete any models regarding following for ourselves. It's just going to complicate things and not much is going to be achieved here. And now let's check if the user is actually following this user that they are trying to unfollow. So const existing follow is await db follow find first, where follower ID is self.id and following ID is other user.id. And now if there is no existing follow, in that case, we're going to throw new error which says not following. So we are trying to unfollow someone who we are not even following. So there is nothing for us to do here. We cannot delete any record. Otherwise, if these tests have passed, so just make sure that you put a little exclamation point here at the end, right? And let's do const follow to be await db follow.delete, where ID is existing follow.id and include following to be true. And return the follow itself, like that. So very similar function as our follow user, but in here we do the opposite. We get the existing follow and we check if it does exist. So right here on the bottom, we check if it doesn't exist, but in here we check if it does exist, and then we throw an error. And then we create a new one because it should not have been existing. And in this one, it's the opposite, right? So in here, we delete the follow model. Great. So now what I want to do is I want to go inside of actions here, inside of follow, and I want to go ahead and create an onUnfollow function. So let's go ahead and export const onUnfollow to be asynchronous, accept the ID, which is a string, open a try and catch block, and let's throw new error, internal error. And now let's do a const unfollowed user to be await unfollow user, which you can import from the follow service. So we have both the follow user and the unfollow user here, and pass in the ID. And then let's do revalidate path. And if we do have unfollowed user information, in that case, let's also reinvalidate. And let me just not misspell this. So unfollowed user, and let's also revalidate / unfollowed user dot following dot username. And let's see if it looks like there is some slight mistake here. Let's also return unfollowed user. So I think I forgot to include this. So go back inside of unfollow user here. And in here, we do add include following true. So why exactly is it not working here? Following does not exist on this type. So unfollow user. But it looks like we do include this. So I'm not exactly sure why. Let me go ahead and quickly debug this. So I'm still not sure why this is happening. I'm going to try, so I pressed Command Shift P, and I'm going to try and reload my window first to see. Okay, it's still not that, so it's not some cache. Perhaps it is, what if I add follower true here? So this is my on unfollow user right here. Do I have access to that? Follower? I don't have access to that either. So why is it like that? So unfollow user, it is an asynchronous function. We await for this. We also await for the delete. And we also return the follow. I'm really not sure. So for now, let's just go ahead and let's do this. Following username like that. Following does not exist on type ID string. It could be that it's some very simple mistake that I've made, but for some reason I cannot figure out what it is. And the bug is very, very obvious, and I just didn't notice it. So this is how I debugged it. So I kept looking at this property here, and it says property following does not exist on this type, and it's a function which returns a promise. So that's obviously not what this returns. And then I noticed that in here I wrote unfollowed user, and in here I wrote unfollow user, which is our function. So that's why it's not working. So this would definitely not work. We have to use this unfollowed user. And there we go. Now we have no errors right here. And also make sure you return unfollowed user. So maybe a better thing would be user we unfollowed. So it's pretty clear, right? So just make sure you don't accidentally reuse this follow user. It could have happened in here as well. You can see it's very close. Followed user and follow user. One is a function and one is a result from that function. So make sure you don't do the same mistake. So we don't have to include follower here inside of our unfollow user function. Great. So this is good. This is good as well. Great. So now what I want to do is I want to use this on unfollow. So let's go ahead back inside of our app folder, browse components, username components actions here. And this is what I'm going to do. I'm actually not going to disable it if we are following. Instead, I'm just going to change the text. So if we are following the user, the action is going to be unfollow. Otherwise, it's going to be follow like this. So now for this one, it says unfollow because is following is true in the database. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to be on follow, actually handle follow, right? And I'm going to copy and paste this. And this one is going to be handle unfollow. And inside, it's not going to use onFollow, it's going to use a server action on unfollow from actions follow. So make sure you import onFollow and onUnfollow, which is the one we just had this annoying little bug here when I forgot to add the proper variable name, right? Great, so now we have handle follow and handle unfollow. And now I'm going to change our const on click here to be if is following handle unfollow, else handle follow, like that. All right, and let's just modify the handle unfollow to say you have unfollowed the user, like this. And I believe this should already be working. So right now in my database, I have one follow model here inside of my user here. I believe I have a proper relation here. There we go. So you can see that this new user is following this user because it has a followed by, which is this user, right? So let's check if all of this will be deleted once I click unfollow. It's loading and it says you have unfollowed this user. You can see how this says is following false. Let's check our database. So my database for follow is empty, and let's check my user here. They don't have any relations between them. Perfect. And if I try and follow them again, it should be working. There we go. You are now following someone else, and in the Prisma Studio, they should now have relations. There we go. They are following one another. Perfect. So you just finished the follow system. And what we have to do next is we have to create an equivalent sidebar place to show our followed users the same way we show our recommended users. Great job. And I hope this kind of cleared up how you can work with server actions, right? They're actually very simple. They're not complicated at all. They're even simpler than your usual API routes, right? And again, sorry for me not seeing this little bug here. It was very obvious, but too many words at once. Great job. So now that we have implemented our following system, I want to create a little sidebar here similar to recommended, which is going to show the followed users. And also when we follow a user, we want to remove that user from the recommended users, right? Because they're already following that user, so no point in recommending them. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run npm run dev because I shut it down. So npm run dev, and in my other terminals I'm not gonna run anything, so I don't have anything running besides npm run dev. No need for ngrok or any local tunnel because we already added our users. So just make sure that you have at least 2 users in your database. So I'm logged in, as you can see, I'm logged in here with a user called Antonio, and in here in my sidebar I have another user. So just make sure you have at least 2 users so you can actually see the effect of what we are going to build. So the first thing I want to do is I want to go back inside of my lib and inside of the follow service right here. And in here I want to create a function which is going to get me all of the users that I am following. So I'm going to do that at the top here. Export const get followed users is going to be an asynchronous function. And first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open a try and catch block. And in the catch, I'm just going to return an empty array, because if a logged out user tries to do this, it's going to immediately fail, because the first thing we do is we attempt to get the currently logged in user. So this will throw an error for users that are not logged in. As you can see right here, we throw that error if we don't have the user. And in that case, we're just going to return an empty array, meaning you're not following anyone because you're not logged in. But for logged in users, we're going to do the following. We're going to return db.follow.findMany, where the follower ID is self.id, like that. And we're also going to include following true. So we have the information about that user. And let's actually put this in a constant first. So followed users, and then let's go ahead and return followed users, like this. There we go. So we have our very simple function which goes through the database and looks at all the users which have a matching follower ID of the currently logged in user, meaning that it's followed by that user. And we also include information about the user that we are following so we can display them nicely inside of our sidebar. So just make sure you added this small little util here. And what I want to do now is I want to go inside of my app folder, browse, components, sidebar, index, and alongside get recommended, I'm also going to add follows. So await get followed users, like that. So make sure you import get followed users from the follow service and make sure you have the recommended service here. And now we're going to do a very similar thing here. So in here, I'm going to create following and pass in the data to be follows, like that. And perhaps we can call this following as well. It seems to be matching. So let's rename this constant to following and this to following as well. Great. Now we have to create this following component. So let's go inside of the sidebar and create following.tsx, like that. And I'm going to mark this as use client and export const following very quickly and just return a div saying following. And now you can go back to index.tsx and you can import following from /following the same way we did with these other ones. So I'm just going to go ahead and align those now. I will move this to the top because I like my imports in that way. Great. And let me just collapse these elements like that. So we have toggle and toggle skeleton and we have this. Great. So now let's go back inside of the following, and first thing we have to do is resolve this TypeScript error because currently it cannot accept this type of data. So let's create an interface following props to accept data, which is gonna be a type of follow, which we can get from Prisma client because we run npx Prisma generate, but we also include something in there, and we include the following property, which is our user from Prisma client. So write it like this and make sure you put an array at the end and make sure this is in parentheses, right? And then let's go ahead and assign that. So following props, like that, and there we go. You can see how immediately this error from my side of following has gone away. So if yours hasn't, confirm that you have the exact same type here, and in your follow service make sure you include following true like this. Now go back inside of here and let's extract the data. And since we marked this as use client, it means that we now have access to whether the sidebar is collapsed or not. So let's go ahead and do use sidebar, which you can import from store use sidebar. I'm just going to separate the imports. Let's get entire state and return it, and let's extract collapsed, like that. And first thing I want to do is if we have no data, so if data length is 0, right? So we can do that quite easily by using this falsy method. We're just going to return null. So no point in showing anything if we are not following any users. Otherwise, let's go ahead and let's create a div here and dynamically render the label. So if we are not collapsed, in that case, let's go ahead and render a div here with a class name of PL6 and margin bottom of 4, and inside a paragraph which just says following. And now I'm going to give this paragraph a class name of text small and text muted foreground, like that. So make sure you follow at least one user, and I think that already you should be seeing this following tab right here. If you click unfollow, this should now disappear. There we go. You can see how it disappears because we do that revalidate path, right? Inside of our actions here, you can see that we do revalidate path both on follow and unfollow, meaning that all of our server components, which in our case is sidebar, gets refetched. And thus it has the newest information and it changes according to this if clause right here, data.length. So when you're not following anyone, you should just have the recommended, but when you click on follow, it should appear for now just a label following because we have enough data to display that. So we skip this return null and instead we show this. But of course, when we are collapsed, we cannot see that. So we can only see that when we are expanded, right? And now let's go ahead and render our users, and we can do that quite easily because we have the user item component already from the recommended part of our code. So let's write a class name for this unordered list with space y2 and px of 2. And inside, let's do data.map, and let's get the individual follow model. And then inside, let's render the user item from ./user item. So make sure you import user item. We already have that right here because we already used it inside of our recommended here. So go back inside of the following where we just imported the user item. And in here, let's go ahead and pass all the necessary props. So that's going to be a key, which is follow.following. So that's the actual user. And then we can get the ID of the user. Let's pass in the username, which is follow.following.username. Let's pass in the image URL, which is follow.following.image URL. And let's also pass is live, which for now we are manually going to change from true or false. So let's put true for now, and let's see how this looks like. And there we go. You can see how now, because I'm following this user, I have it in my following tab. And when I unfollow this user, it's going to disappear from this tab right here. And when I follow them back, they will immediately appear here. Perfect. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to remove this is live prop from here, because later we're going to control it with another model which we don't have just yet. So one more thing that I want to add here is the following skeleton. So let's go ahead and do export const following skeleton, and let's return an unordered list. Let's give it a class name of px2 padding top 2 button large padding top is 0, and we're gonna do a mock array. So we're gonna pretend like we are loading 3 users, and let's map over them, skipping the first one and going directly to the index. And inside, return the user item skeleton, which you can import from the equally named component user item, which we already did here. And all we have to do is pass in the key, which is I. Like this. Great, so make sure that you have the following skeleton. And now what I want to do is I want to add this following skeleton to our sidebar skeleton. So go into the sidebar, find the index, and here we already do the recommended skeleton. So first thing I want to do is I actually want to show the followed users before I show the recommended users. So let's switch the position of these two. So this is inside of the main sidebar function. Let's move the following to be above recommended. I think that's just better practice. And then let's add the following skeleton above the recommended skeleton. Great, so this is gonna add that following for our loading functions. I'm not sure if we can, there we go, you can see that for a split second now we have the following skeleton, but we also have to add it to one more place if you remember, and that is the wrapper, because in here we also have a little skeleton for server-side rendering and that hydration issue that we had. So just above recommended skeleton, add the following skeleton as well, so our skeletons now match. So make sure you have this 3. So this is the wrapper component inside of our sidebar folder. Like that, and now everything should be completely fine. So when we are loading here, there we go, you can see we have twice the amount of users that we had before because we're also loading the followed ones, and you can see that as well in the mobile mode, and we seem to not be having any hydration errors here. Exactly what we want. And now what I want to do is that when I follow a user, I want to remove them from the recommended list, the same way we're doing right now with the followed list when we unfollow someone. So in order to do that, we have to revisit our recommended service. So go inside of the lib, recommended service right here, and now we have to modify it only for this clause where we have the actual where we have the user ID, meaning that the user is logged in. So we have to create 2 queries. So right now we have a query which says do not recommend yourself, meaning do not recommend the currently logged in user, but we have to add another one, and we can do that by using the AND query, and that is an array like this, and then you have to open an object. So go ahead and copy this not and put it inside of this first object like that. Great, so now I will actually do it like this. and indent this, there we go. And then you can join as many of these queries as you want. So open another object and then write another not, and then write followed by some, open an object again, follower ID, to never be user ID, meaning that we are not going to recommend the user if they are following that user, right? So make sure you modified your where query to this. So we added an end property, we opened an array, we opened an object and copied that old not query. Then we opened another query here and we specified that we also don't want to be following that user. And now you should only have the following. So expand to your desktop mode and it should only say following. But if you unfollow the user, it should remove the following and instead it should say recommended, exactly as we want. And if you log out completely, it should still work, but both of them should only be in the recommended. When we are logged out, we are never gonna have any followed users. Great, so you just wrapped up the follow service, and now we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna create the equivalent actions for blocking a user. Now that we've finished our following system, what I want to do is I want to create a blocking system. So in order to do that, the first thing we have to do is add it inside of our Prisma schema. So let's go inside of here. And just as we created this model follow, we're now going to create a model block, which is going to be very, very similar to this one. So let's go ahead and write model block. Let's give it an ID, which is a string. It's going to be our primary ID with a default value of UUID. And then it's going to have, just like above, we had the follower ID and following ID. Here, we're going to have the blocker ID, which is a string, and we're going to have the blocked ID, which is a string. And then we have to create two relations, relation for the blocker, and we have to create a relation for the blocked user. So first, let's do the creation for the blocker. So that is a user with a relation, which we are going to name blocking. Fields for this relation are going to work with blocker ID, so this field right here. And it's going to reference, so references an array to ID. Let me zoom out so you can see this is all supposed to be in one line when you're writing this. So references ID, which refers to the user ID, right? So references ID, and after that we're gonna add on delete to be cascade like that. And while we are here, oh, I misspelled this, so this should be fields like that. And you should be having an error here because we don't have an equal relation for the user. So we're gonna come back to that. For now, let's just create the exact same thing, but for blocked. So blocked is also a user, relation, name, blocked by, fields, blocked ID, references, ID, and on delete, cascade. So keep in mind that all of this is supposed to be in one line as I've zoomed out right here. And now that we have this, we have to go back inside of our user model and we have to create the equivalent relations. So just make sure that in the blocker relation, the name of the relation is blocking and the fields is blocker ID. And in the blocked, relation name is blocked by and fields is blocked ID. And now go back inside of your user, and just as we created the following and followed by, let's create blocking to be the model block, and the relation name for that is going to be blocking. And then create blocked by, which is also block, but relation name here is blocked by. So very similar to what we had here for the following. And now what we have to do is we have to go back to the block model here and create the indexes. So let's go ahead and create an index for blocker ID. And let's create an index for the blocked ID. And then let's also add a unique constraint on the blocker ID and the blocked ID. So this will also create an index for us for faster querying. So just make sure that you have this exact model block. Again, confirm that the blocker ID is used in the blocker relation, which we name blocking, and ensure that the blocked ID is used for the blocked relation, which we call blocked by, and use the field blocked ID. Great, now that you've done this, let's go ahead inside of our terminal, shut down your app, this is important, otherwise you're gonna have some errors, and do npx prisma generate, so we add those to our local environment, and then npx prisma db push, so we add them to our local database. And only after you've done those two, go ahead and confirm by doing npx prisma studio, so this should open it on localhost 5555. So let's go inside of our browser here and let me just try that out. And now when I click on this plus here, there we go. I have a new model block alongside my follow and my user. So we successfully added that. Great. So you don't have to start the application just yet, because what we're going to do now is we're going to develop our block service. So let's go inside of our lib folder and create a new file, block service.ts. Let's go ahead and let's import the database. Let's go ahead and let's import getSelf. And what I'm going to do is just replace this imports to use @/lib like this. You don't have to do this. And now let's do export const is blocked by user. ID is a string, and this is also going to be an asynchronous function. So this is going to be obviously a function which checks whether the user, currently logged in user, is blocked by any specific user we are loading. So let's open a try and catch block, and in the catch here I want to return false. So if anything goes wrong, we're going to default to telling them that they are not blocked by that user. And then let's go ahead and attempt to fetch a self using await get self, which we have imported, and then let's get the other user. So that is await db user find unique, where we have a matching ID. So just in case you don't know, writing ID like this or like this is the same thing. So if the key and the value is named exactly the same, you can use a shorthand like that, just in case you were confused about that. If we cannot find the other user, let's throw a new error, user not found. So we cannot check whether we are blocked by this user or not. So we're going to fall back to telling them false. And now let's check if this is ourselves. So if other user ID is equal to self.id, we can just return false. Right? So why am I even doing this checks, right? I also do that inside of the follow service. I also prevent any querying from going on if we are doing an action on ourselves. Well, we technically don't have to do that. Prisma could do that check for us, but this way we don't even do any querying in the database. So we optimize it just a little bit so we don't do any unnecessary row reads or row writes if this function is not even supposed to be supported. So that's why we do these checks, to break the function early if it's something that we're not even supporting. So make sure you're back inside of your block service and working on the is blocked by user function. And after we confirm that this is not the user themselves, let's check if we are blocked. So const existing block is going to be await db block dot find first, where the blocker ID is other user.id and blocked ID is self.id. And then what we're gonna do is return Boolean based on the fact whether this record exists in the database or not. So if it exists, we're gonna return true, you are blocked. If it doesn't exist, we're gonna return false, and we ensure that this is a Boolean by adding these two exclamation points here. So now when you use this function, you can see that it is a promise which returns a Boolean. And if you didn't add those two, well, you could probably still work with it, but you can see that now it's a promise which returns an entire object or a Boolean. So it's just kind of weird to work with. So this way we save ourselves some types here. And I believe that we can actually improve this. Instead of using find first, I think that we can use find unique, but then we have to use a specific type. I believe blocker ID and blocked ID. Yes, like that. And then inside we can pass blocker ID to be other user.id and blocked ID to be self.id. So what's the difference between find unique and find first? Well, both of them can kind of serve in the same way, right? But find unique, in this case, will use an index on that unique constraint which we just created. So this is going to be a faster query rather than the find first, where it would go through all of the records until it finds the matching one. Whereas this one will use the index which was created by the unique constraint. And I believe we can also improve that in our follow service, but we're not going to do that now. But yes, here we also do find first. If I remember, I'm going to come back to this. I want to make sure that we test it out, that it's actually working properly. So I'm just going to leave it like this for now. For this module, I will just focus on the blocking features here. So let's go ahead and leave it like this for now. And that wraps up our isBlockedByUser. What I want to create now is the function to block and the function to unblock the user. So let's write export const block user with capital U to be an asynchronous function which accepts the ID of the user we are trying to block, gets the self from await getSelf, checks if self.id is equal to the ID of the user we are trying to block, and in that case we are going to throw an error, cannot block yourself, and this way we are optimizing our application, so no unnecessary queries, rows, reads or writes are done beyond this point. Now let's go ahead and get the other user we are trying to block. So await db user find unique, where we have the matching ID of that user. If there is no other user, let's throw new error, user not found. What I want to do next, after we confirm that this user exists, is check if we already have blocked that user, right? So const existing block is await db block find unique, where, and let's use that blocker ID and blocked ID constraint here. So blocker ID is self.id and blocked ID is other user.id. So if we already blocked this user, we're going to throw an error because this is a function to block them again, right? So if existing block is true, throw new error, already blocked. And now let's go ahead and finally create this block function if none of the above is true. So const block is await db block create data, blocker ID is self.id and blocked ID is other user.id. And I also want to add an include here. So in our success message, we can clearly write who we just blocked. So we're going to populate the field blocked. And that way we're going to get the user which was blocked, because blocked is going to be our user. You can see in here, blocked field has the ID, username, image URL. So that's our user relation, and just return block at the end. And now let's go ahead and wrap this up by creating an equivalent unblock user. So export const unblock user, again, an asynchronous function, which takes in the ID, which is a string. Let's get self using await get self. If self ID is equal to the ID we are trying to block, let's go ahead and throw new error here, cannot unblock yourself. Basically, we cannot either block ourselves or unblock ourselves. If the ID is the same, no point in running the function further. And now let's go ahead and get the other user using await db user find unique, where we have a matching ID inside. And let's go ahead and check if we don't have the other user, throw new error, user not found. Otherwise, let's go ahead and check if we have an existing block for this user or not. So const existing block is await db block find unique, where let's use our unique constraint here. So if you're not getting this autocomplete here, I probably should have mentioned this earlier, right? If you're not getting this autocomplete, which we are using inside of this unique find unique, right? So the reason this exists is because of our Prisma schema. So in here, inside of our block model, we define a unique constraint on blocker ID and blocked ID. And that's what creates an index and allows us to do this querying by blocker ID and blocked ID. You can see how it generated a combination of those two. So go back to the unblock user function here. And here we are looking for an existing block. So let's give the blocker ID to be self ID and blocked ID to be other user.id. And if we don't have an existing block, so the opposite of what we check in the block function, so make sure you put an exclamation point here, that means that this user is not blocked, so we cannot unblock him. So we're gonna throw new error, not blocked. And now finally, let's go ahead and write const unblock to be await db block.delete. And let's go ahead and pass in where ID is existing block.id. And let's also include the blocked person. Well, previously blocked person, right? So we can tell in our toast message who was unblocked. And let's return block. Let's return unblock, sorry. Great. And later we're going to have one more function in here, which is going to be to load all blocked users. But we're going to do that later when we get to the part where we actually need this information. Great. So we finished our blocked service for now. Now let's go ahead and create our server actions, which are going to use this block service. So let's go inside of actions and create a new file, block.ts. And in here, let's write export const on block to accept the ID, which is a string. And inside of here, let's go ahead and let's write const blocked user to be await block user from lib block service. And let's just pass in the ID like that. And then what I want to do is just simply write revalidate. We can do the same thing that we did in the following action, right? If we have the blocked, not block, oh, almost made that mistake. So make sure you're not writing block user when you're doing this. So this should be blocked user, this constant right here. In my unfollow function, I used the equivalent of block user, and then it was very confusing because this is a function. So this is blocked user. Make sure you use that. So if we have blocked user, what I want to do is I want to call revalidate path here from next cache, and I'm going to go ahead and revalidate that user ID here. So let's go ahead and call slash blocked user dot not blocked user dot blocked dot username, like that. And let's also call the validate path on the root as well. And let's return the blocked user. Great. And now while we are here, let's also create an equivalent to unblock the user. So we can just copy this here. Let's name this on unblock. Let's call this unblocked user. Let's await unblock user from our lib block service. So make sure you import the unblock user function here. And then we're going to work with the unblocked user. So if we have the unblocked user, use the unblocked user username and return the unblocked user. So what I'm going to write here is a to-do list adapt to disconnect from a live stream, and to do allow ability to kick the guest, right? Because if we are trying to, we're going to reuse this function later when we implement our chat, right? So what that's supposed to do is block the user in our database, but also immediately kick the user from the stream and disconnect them, so they're not gonna be able to see the stream immediately, right? The moment the stream creator clicks the block button, they're immediately disconnected. But we will also allow guests to look at the stream, meaning people that are not logged in. So this function will most likely break. So we're gonna have to come back to this later and adapt it. But for now, this is just fine. What I want to do now is I want to go back inside of my username page. So that is, make sure you save this file. Of course, go inside of app, browse username page right here. And in here we have is following. Now let's go ahead and let's add is blocking and do await is blocked. So this is blocked by user actually. Yes. So okay, we're not gonna do anything here. This is what we're gonna do. We're gonna go remove this import. You're not gonna need this. Yes, because we don't have this is block. Can we create that function? Let me go ahead and see. Maybe we can create, because we're not gonna need it, but just for this example, maybe it's better that we create that function. So this is blocked by user, but how about we create an equivalent one for if we blocked a user, right? But let's leave it like this for now. This is what I'm going to do. So inside of my actions here, I'm gonna go ahead and add 2 buttons here. So go ahead and add a fragment here, and I'm gonna add 1 button below this, which is going to say block user, right? Or we can just write block here. And let's go ahead and run our app. So npm run dev here. And let's go inside of localhost 3000 here. So we're not going to look at this by any logs, but what we are going to do is we're going to look at our Prisma Studio. So let's also open up Prisma Studio. So npx Prisma Studio, that should be running on localhost 5555 here. And make sure you're logged in. Now go ahead and click on a random user. And we should be having the block button here. Great. And now let's go ahead and do the following. So let's add a const on block here. And let's actually call it handle block, because we already have a function called on block in our actions. And in here, I'm just going to reuse the start transition. And I'm going to call on block from actions block. So go ahead and import that. So this is of course just a test component where we're trying out our services now. And inside pass in the user ID. And let's add .then here, let's get the data, and let's call toast.success, and let's write blocked the user data, blocked username. And let's also add .catch, toast error, something went wrong, like that. And now let's go ahead and give this button an on click to be handle block, and disabled is pending here. And now let's go ahead and see if this is working. So inside of my Prisma Studio here, right now I have nothing inside of my block table, right? It's completely empty. But if I click block here, it looks like something went wrong. So let's go ahead and see what exactly went wrong. So did we call the correct function? Actions block inside of here on block. So the way I'm going to debug this, because I don't believe we got anything in our terminal. Yeah, it looks completely empty. What I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap this on block inside of try catch. So I'm going to write try, and then I'm going to write catch here. I'm going to get the error, and I will write console log error. So this way we can debug what's going on here. So I'm going to open my terminal, and I will click block again. It looks like we are immediately getting an error. It could be that I wrote something wrong in here. Okay, let's see why. Let's do this without this catch functions. What does that do? Does that give us an error in our terminal? Does it add something in our database? It doesn't, so it's not working. Something is wrong here. Let's go ahead and check the onBlock. So we pass in the ID and we await block user here, and we pass the ID here. But we're not getting any errors, it seems. So I'm going to add a console log here. Oh, I think I know what it is. Yes. So inside of our actions, we did not add use server. That's what we forgot. That's what's important with server actions. So it's good that this didn't work, because otherwise we could have spilled our API secrets somewhere in the bundle. Let's try this again. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to bring back these actions because I still want to debug this. How come this is not working? How come data is possibly undefined here when I'm doing the same thing for the following here? So let me check my onBlock function again. So Oh, I think it's because I wrapped this inside of try and catch. So if I remove try catch, yeah, then it works. So I'm gonna remove my try and catch now. I added the use server here, so make sure you do that. I'm just gonna save this to be exactly as it was from before. And I'm gonna go ahead and prepare my Prisma Studio again. So now it says block. I will click block and let's see, block the user something else. Perfect. And if I refresh here, I should have the model block, and I do. And in my users model, I should have the equivalent relations here. So let's see, blocking this user, which is my currently logged in user, Antonio, seems to be blocking someone, and the user above is blocked by someone, which can only be the other user in my database. So this is officially working. What I want to create now is just change this to be unblock. So I'm not going to do anything complicated. I will rename this to unblock. And I'm going to go ahead here and I'm going to write, well, I'm just going to call the on unblock, right? From actions block. So make sure you import on unblock here. So we're just testing our functions. And in here, I'm going to write unblocked the user, right? Let's try it out now. So I'm going to go ahead. In my Prisma Studio, I have my block model, which should be deleted after I click unblock here. So let's try it out. And it says that I've unblocked that user. And when I refresh here, there we go. You can see that now we no longer have any blocking relations, meaning that these users are officially not blocking one another. Perfect. So confirm that this is working for you. What we have to do now is we have to modify our recommended service and our following service to exclude blocked users from the list, right? So we're going to do the following. Just leave this as it is for now. This is just our test component. And let's go back inside of our lib, inside of the recommended service. And in here, we already started doing some combinations on our queries. So alongside this followed by, let's also go ahead and let's add another not blocking some blocked ID user ID. So when we load our recommended list, this way we ensure that none of those users in that list are blocking the currently logged in user, right? And I also want to do the same thing inside of my follow service. So let's go inside of the follow service here. And in here we have get followed users. So even if we follow them, if they blocked us, we are no longer going to show them in the following list because there's going to be no way for the user to look at that user's stream. So inside of this where clause alongside the follower ID, we're going to add if the following user has a blocking relation and it's supposed to be none for the blocked ID self ID. So we ensure that the user we are following is not blocking that user. Great. So in order to test this out, we have to do the following. We have to create a block. We have to initiate the block action. So let's go back inside of components actions here and change this handle block to again use the on block, right? So we already have this imported in here. So make sure this time you use on block as we did the first time. And I'm going to rename this function to block. Then make sure in your database that you don't have any block relations, right? Or if you do, you can just leave it as it is or just initiate an unblock function. Basically, it's going to be easier to follow if you have the exact same thing that I am. So I have nothing inside of my blocked here and my users have no relation when it comes to being blocked by one another. So now I am, as Antonio, am going to block this user here. So I'm going to go ahead and click block here. Like this, and my toast message I think stayed the same. And now in here, there we go. I now have one blocked user. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to log out and I'm going to enter as this user, and this user should no longer be recommended right here, right? So let's go ahead and log out now. And now I'm going to go ahead and log in with the other user. And as you can see, I have nothing inside of my recommended or my following tab. because that user is blocking, right? And here's what we can do now. So I know that my other user's username is Antonio from my database, right? So I'm gonna copy this username. I'm gonna go manually to localhost 3000/Antonio, and this is what I can do now. So since I know that I am blocked by this user, we can go inside of username page.tsx and we can write const is blocked by this user. Await is blocked by user. So that's why I named this is blocked by this user, because our function name is blocked by user, which you can import from block service. So I'm just going to move this here. And let's go ahead and pass in the user.id. So is blocked by this user, or we can just do is blocked. So is blocked, await is blocked by user. And in here, I'm going to write a paragraph which says is blocked. And let's go ahead, is blocked by this user. And we're going to go ahead and open backticks like this and render is blocked like this. And it should be rendering true. And it does, as you can see right here. It says is blocked by this user that we are trying to load is true. And what we're going to do later is very simple. In here, we're going to check if is blocked. In that case, we're just going to render the not found function, which we already use here. So now when someone tries to manually visit the blocked user, as we just did right now, they're going to get a 404. So we're going to completely prevent the blocked person from finding this user anywhere. Great, and I'm just going to remove this for now, just in case we need to come back to this and do some more testing. Perfect, and just to confirm that this is still working with backwards compatibility, what I want to do is log out. And as you can see here, we have both users. Now I will log back in with the other user and I will unblock myself. So here I am in the other user. And in here, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to unblock myself. So let's go ahead and just go back inside of the actions. And now we're going to use this on unblock function here. So let's just replace onBlock with onUnblock here. Make sure you save that. Let's click on this. Now it says block, but you know what the code is actually doing. And now in my database, I should no longer be having this block relation again. There we go. And if I log out and if I go back inside of the other user now, there we go. I am fully unblocked and I can visit this user again, and it says is blocked by this user false. And you can see that it was the same user. You can see in my URL that it says Antonio, which I previously went to manually, and it clearly said that I was blocked by that user. And you're probably noticing that once I block a user, I allow the user who blocked that user to see their profile, but I don't allow the opposite, right? So that's my design choice. You yourself can go even further and make sure that those two users never see each other, right? So I'm imagining the block function to be more used as block this user from my stream, right? But I still want to be able to see that user in my homepage, but that user that I blocked should not see me anywhere on the page. So that's how I imagined the block system. You can of course modify the code if you like it some other way, but I would recommend that you keep it this way until you finish the tutorial, and then when you finish, go ahead and play around and make it your own, right? Great, so we now finished our blocking service, and now what we're finally ready to do is start creating our stream model, which is going to control whether we are live or not. And we're gonna go ahead and create this little user dashboard where we're gonna control the settings of the stream, and then we're gonna be finally ready to create a live stream connection and some real-time chat. Great job. So what I want to build now is the creator dashboard, and we already have something prepared for us here. So I want you to go inside of the app folder, browse, components, navbar, and in here you have the actions component. And in here we have a couple of things. So we have our login button if we are not logged in. But if we are logged in, we render the user button, and alongside user button, we render one button with an icon clapperboard which says dashboard on desktop, and it redirects to /u and then the username of the currently logged in user. So that is this button in the navbar right here which says dashboard. So I'm currently logged in as the username something else, and when I click here, you can see that in my URL I am on localhost 3000/u/something else, and it's a 404 page because we don't have that developed yet. So you can already kind of imagine the structure we need to build this page, but I've also prepared a little diagram here. So it's supposed to be something like a U folder, and then dynamic username folder, and then page.tsx. And that's absolutely true. But what I'm gonna do is do exactly that, but I'm also gonna add another route group inside of it called home, so I can keep my page.tsx in a separate folder, because then this home folder will also have some components, some loading states, maybe even its own layout. So it's better for it to be like this rather than just cluttered around in the username folder where it doesn't belong. And this route right here, I mean this folder structure, is going to equal this localhost which we just saw a second ago. So let's go ahead and let's close everything here. And what I want to do is I want to go inside of the app folder, and first I want to create another top level layout group called dashboard. So go ahead and create a dashboard route like this, and then inside create another folder called U, and then another folder dynamic username like that, and then inside we're going to create another route group called home, and then inside page.tsx. So the reason I created this home is because now inside of here I can create a new component called new folder called components, which are only going to be components used for this exact page, because later this username page is going to have another set of subroutes like keys, chat, community. So it makes sense that we also hold the initial route inside of its own folder, but I also don't want this home to be part of the URL. It would just be weird. So this way we took care of that. So let's go ahead and create this page. So I'm gonna call it creator page and just return a div creator page like this. So if you have your actions properly, so these actions in the browse components navbar actions, which lead to /u/username from the current user here, you should be seeing this creator page now when you click on the little dashboard icon here at the top, or if you are on mobile, it's just going to be the clapperboard icon. So when I click here, there we go. It says creator page, and I'm redirected to the correct URL. Great, so I'm going to leave this creator page to be as it is now, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create a little useful lib for us in the out service. So go inside of the lib folder out service, and the same way we did get self, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to write export const get self by username like that, and go ahead and write an asynchronous function which accepts the username, which is a string. Let's go ahead and get self using the function await current user. So we already have this from clerk above, so await current user. And then what we're going to do is we're going to check if we have that current user. So if there is no self, or if there is no self.username, throw new error unauthorized like that. And then let's go ahead and fetch the actual user by this username from our database. So await db.user find unique, where we have a matching username. If there is no such user, throw new error user not found. And if we do have that user, we still have to check if that's the currently logged in user. So this function is not the same as our user service where we have get user by username. So this is to load any user at all. but this specific service is to load our creator dashboard using our username, right? Because that's the structure of our URL. And if you're wondering why did I even choose this URL structure, no, that's because I looked at other live streaming websites and how they handle that, and this is the solution they use. We could have technically just do something like /dashboard or /creator, but one thing that this could allow in the future is modularity, right? So for example, if you were to continue developing this platform and maybe enable some moderators, right, which can modify specific username, specific users' stream and settings. So this way, you're gonna allow them to be admins of multiple users because our URL uses the username for the creator dashboard. So that's one pro of this solution. The con is obviously that we have to do this bit complex query here. So now that we confirm that we have our user, make sure you are in the out service working on the get self by username. Now let's go ahead and check if self.username is not equal to user.username. And if that's the case, throw new error, unauthorized. So we are never going to be able to look at someone else's creator dashboard. And then just return self, like this. Or we can actually return the entire user from the database. That might be even better, like that. Great. And now what I want to do is I want to go inside of the app folder, inside of dashboard, and I want to go inside of the username here, and I want to go ahead and create layout.tsx. So not inside of the home folder, but inside of the username folder here. And let's go ahead and create this creator layout here. And let's just go ahead and give this layout all the props it needs. So interface creator layout props is going to have params which hold the username, which is a string, and the reason we have that is because this is a server component by default and it's inside the dynamic username folder, meaning that it has this in the params. And since this is a layout file, we also know that we have the children, so we can add that as well. And then we can just easily render the children inside. And of course, let's go ahead and actually add this props. So creator layout, creator layout props, and let's extract the params and the children. And now you should be seeing the creator page just as we did a couple of moments ago. But now what we can do is we can go ahead and write const self to be await get self by username from our libout service here. And in here we can pass params.username. And we have to turn this into an asynchronous function as well. And then let's go ahead and write if there is no self, redirect from next/navigation to the root page, like this. There we go. So if we are trying to be any other user, we're going to get an error from this function, or if by any chance we don't get an error from the function, but we don't get self as an object, we're just going to remove the user from that page. So this way, only ourselves can load the creator dashboard for our username. Anyone else who tries will get redirected and get thrown errors. And we are later also going to create a proper error page for this. So now let's go ahead and let's actually style this thing. So it's not going to be a div, it's just going to be an empty fragment. And let's go ahead and wrap this inside of a div inside. And let's give this div a class name of flex, age full, and padding top of 20. So now you can see that our creator page has some space here at the top, and that space is going to be for our navbar. So what we can do here is we can copy the navbar from our existing browse component here. So go into browse components and you should have the navbar. So let's go ahead and copy this entire folder here. And now let's go ahead inside of the username and create another folder underscore components. And you can just paste the entire navbar folder. So you should have the actions, index, logo, and search. And now go ahead and let's render the navbar above it from /components navbar, because we now have them in these components. And now you should have the exact same navbar as you have on your other page, but of course we're going to modify it a bit because we don't need the search page and we also need an exit button from here. So let's go ahead and do the following. Go inside of this newly created navbar and go inside of the index here. And at first I want to remove the search and I want to remove the search import. So no search for this one. So now your search should disappear from here, right? And what you can do now is also remove the search component. Make sure you don't accidentally remove it from the browse. So just close browse. Make sure you are inside of dashboard, inside of username components navbar, and go inside of here and remove that search and refresh your page to ensure you're not getting any errors. And now let's go back inside of here, and first thing I want to do is I want to modify the logo a bit. So let's go inside of the logo here and let's modify it so it doesn't say let's play here. Instead, let's write creator dashboard. So now when you expand to desktop mode, you should be seeing the creator dashboard right here. Great. And what we have to modify next is the actions component. So let's go inside of the actions, of course the copied actions, right? And this is what we're going to do. We're going to remove this await current user. We can remove the async from the actions. And we no longer need this login button because this page will only be visible for users who are already logged in. So this is what I'm actually going to do. I'm just going to remove everything from here, right? I don't need anything at all. And let's start from the beginning. Let's create a div here with a class name, flex, item center, justify end, and gap x2. Then inside, let's render a button component, and let's just simply add a link inside with an exit. And let's write an href to go to the root page. And let's add a logout icon from Lucid React. So make sure you import logout. We can remove everything from clerk here for now, and we can remove the clapperboard like this. And now you should have this exit button here. So now what I want to do is give this button a couple of properties. So give it a size of small, a variant of ghost, a class name of text muted foreground, and hover text primary. And let's give it an as child property so it properly handles this link. And let's give this logout URL a class name of h5, width 5, and margin right of 2. And outside of this button, let's add the user button from Clerk Next.js. So make sure you import Clerk Next.js user button here. And this is going to be a self-closing tag. And let's give it a property after sign out URL to go to the root page. Like that. And now, as you can see, we have our new dashboard here. So I'm just going to refresh this page. And there we go. Now this says creator dashboard. When I click on the exit, I am back on the home page and I have my recommended users. But when I click on the dashboard here, there we go. I'm on /u, my username, which I can confirm from here as well. And now we can go ahead and continue developing this. So now let's go ahead and let's create the creator sidebar right here. So for that, we have to go back inside of our username. So inside of dashboard, username layout here. And just above the children, let's go ahead and let's add the sidebar component. And make sure you don't import this from anywhere because it should not exist. So don't accidentally import the existing one from app browse components. We're not going to use that one. It's going to be similar, but we're not going to use it. So now let's go ahead inside of the components and create a new folder, sidebar. And inside of here, create an index.tsx. And let's export const sidebar from here. And let's return a div sidebar. Now go back inside of your layout.tsx and you can import the sidebar from /components sidebar. So just as we did with the navbar. And when you save, you should have this sidebar here on the side. Great. So what I want to do now is I want to go ahead and create a store for our creator sidebar. So we can collapse this as well, right? So for that, I'm going to close everything and I'm going to go inside of my store folder and I will copy and paste the existing use sidebar and I'm going to rename it to use-creator sidebar like this. So make sure you have this one and then let's go ahead and replace all instances of sidebar with creator sidebar like that. So it's going to have all the exact same props. So we have the create sidebar store. We're going to call it use creator sidebar. And in here, we're using create sidebar store. Everything else stays exactly the same, right? So now what I want to do is I want to go back inside of my app folder, dashboard, username components sidebar in here. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to replace this div to be our wrapper component, right? So we already have one, but we're not going to reuse it because we're going to create a new one here. So go ahead and create the wrapper.tsx component inside and go ahead and mark it as use client. And now let's import cn from libutils, and let's also import use creator sidebar from store creator sidebar. Let's create an interface wrapper props here, which is going to accept children, which are react.react node. And now let's export const wrapper here, and let's assign the props wrapper props. Let's go ahead and extract the children from here. Let's go inside, and let's return an aside element. Let's give it a class name, which is gonna be dynamic. So first I want to give its classes of fixed, left 0, flex call, width of 70 pixels by default. On large devices is going to be 60, which is 240 pixels, age full, bg background, border right, and border of a specific hex color 2D2E35. And let's give it a Z50 index. And now inside, let's just render the children like that. Now go back inside of your sidebar index component and import that wrapper from ./wrapper like that. And now, as you can see, we have a nice little sidebar, and you can see how on mobile it is collapsed and on desktop it is big. Great. So now what I want to do is I want to enable that hook to also be part of the CSS here. So let's go ahead and extract collapsed from use creator sidebar. Let's get the entire state here. And now what I want to do is add dynamic if it is collapsed. In that case, we're going to go ahead and fix the width to 70 pixels, just as it would be on the mobile mode, right? Great. So now that we have our wrapper, what we have to create next is our toggle component, right? So let's go ahead inside. Well, first let's add it here, right? So I'm going to add a little toggle component, and don't import this from anywhere. We're going to create a new one. So inside of the new sidebar folder, create a new file, toggle.tsx. Let's mark this as use client, and let's go ahead and export const toggle like this, and let's return a div saying toggle. Let's go back inside of our new sidebar index, and let's import toggle from ./toggle. Now go back inside of the toggle component, and let's go ahead and develop this. So first thing that I want to do is I want to go ahead and extract everything I need from use creator sidebar. So make sure you import this and make sure that toggle component has use client. Let's go ahead and get the entire state and return it. And now let's extract everything we need. So we need collapsed, we need on expand, and we need on collapse here. Now let's go ahead and write the dynamic label. So label is going to be if collapsed, it's going to say expand, otherwise collapse. So just as it is in our toggle component in our main sidebar on the home page, right? So it's going to be very similar to this one. You probably could have found a way to reuse that, but I just find it easier to write it twice in this case. I don't think it's such a big deal. It gives me more clarity and gives me more control if I want to customize it even further later in the future. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to replace this divs with a fragment. And first thing I'm going to write, if we are not collapsed, actually let's start with collapsed. So if we are collapsed, in that case, let's go ahead and open a div with a class name with full hidden LG flex items center, justify center, padding top of 4 and margin bottom of 4. And inside, let's add our hint component, which we already have developed. So make sure you import the hint component in here. Let's pass in the label to be label from our constant here above. Let's give it a side of right, and let's give it as child property. And inside, let's open up a button component. So make sure you import button from @/components UI button. And let's go ahead and give it a couple of attributes here. So I'm going to give it on click to be on expand. I'm going to give it a variant of ghost. I'm going to give it a class name of HAuto and padding 2. And inside, I'm going to render arrow right from line from Lucid React. So make sure you import arrow right from line from Lucid React here. And I just want to give this little icon a smaller size by using the height of 4 and the width of 4, right? And this should now not be visible anywhere, right? But if you go inside of your store, inside of use creator dashboard, and change the collapse to be true by default and expand to desktop mode, you should be seeing a little icon here, right? And this icon is a toggle button. So the same thing that we had previously, right? So now change this collapsed from true back to false in the use creator sidebar, and let's go back inside of our new toggle component. So make sure you are developing inside of dashboard, username components, sidebar toggle right here. Great. So now we finished the collapsed state, and now let's go ahead and let's create the not collapsed state. So if we are not collapsed, go ahead and create a class name, padding 3, PL6, margin bottom of 2, hidden, LG, flex, items center, and width full. Inside, create a paragraph which says dashboard. And let's go ahead and give this class name font semi-bold and text primary. And below that, let's open up a new hint component here. Let's go ahead and pass in the label to be label. Let's pass in a side to be right and as child property. And then inside, let's render our button component, which we already have imported because we just used it a couple of moments ago. And inside of here, I'm just going to prepare a couple of attributes. So I'm going to give it an on click to be on collapse. And I'm going to give it a variant of ghost. And I think I misspelled this variant like that. And let's go ahead and also give it a class name of HAuto, padding 2, and MLAuto. And let's render arrow left from line from Lucid React like this. So make sure you import this as well. So this is the not collapsed state finished now. And I believe that if we expand, there we go. We now have our dashboard here like this. Great. So now it seems like we just have to modify the actual functionality, but this one seems much larger than the one below. Let's see if we misspelled something here. Yes, I forgot to give classes to this one. So go inside of the arrow left from line and give it a class name of h4 and width 4. And now they should be appropriately the same size, like this. Great. So now what we have to do is we have to enable our wrapper to actually change the sizes, because it seems like it's not doing that. So I want to go ahead and revisit my wrapper component. So go inside of the sidebar folder, inside of your new wrapper component here. And in here, it seems like we are using the collapsed state here, but for some reason, this doesn't seem to be working. So let's go ahead and see why that is happening. If I go ahead and write it like this, will that work then? Let's try it out. So if I go here and click on this, now it seems to be working. So it seems to be because of these default classes, which I have right here, right? Let's take a look here. Yes, it seems to be because of that. So let's go ahead and do this. I'm just going to make it like this on default. So in my new wrapper component, make sure that the default size is W60 like this. And that should fix this issue, right? So when I'm collapsing here, this seems to be working just fine. All right, and now what we have to do is an equivalent container to push our content on the side when we are expanded, and when we are collapsed. So let's go back inside of our dashboard layout here, or creator layout, right? And let's wrap the children inside of a container component. So don't import this from anywhere, it does not exist yet. We only have the one from the home layout, right? But this is a different layout. Let's go inside of the components and let's create a new file, container.tsx, like this. And let's go ahead and mark this as use client. And let's go ahead and let's import use effect from React. Let's go ahead and let's import use media query from usehooks TS. Let's go ahead and import cn from libutils. And let's go ahead and import use creator sidebar from our store. And now let's create an interface container props to accept the children, which are react.react node. And now let's export const container. Let's assign the props to it. So container props. And let's go ahead and just simply let's do a return div which renders the children, right? And now let's just go ahead and extract the children from the props. And now we have our container component. Go back inside of your creator layout and import that from /components container. So this is the imports you should have: navbar, sidebar, and the container. Great. And now you should no longer be having any errors here. So let's go inside of the container now. And here's what I want to do. First, I want to go ahead and I want to import everything I need from use sidebar, use creator sidebar. So let's get the entire state here and let's extract the collapsed state on collapse and on expand, like that. And then let's go ahead and let's use the use effect here. Actually, let's also add const matches to be use media query, and let's use max width 1024 pixels. So now we're going to do that automatic collapsing and expanding of the sidebar if the user changes from desktop view to mobile view using the use effect. This is the same thing that we did inside of our first container component. So if it matches, on collapse, else on expand. And now let's add all the necessary dependencies, which are matches, on collapse, and on expand, like that. And now I want to go ahead inside of here and write a class name to be dynamic, flex1 by default, and then if we are collapsed, ML is going to be 70 pixels. Otherwise, ML is going to be 70 pixels on mobile, but on large, it's going to be 60, meaning that it's going to be expanded. Great, so let's go ahead and try this out now. So in here, when I click collapse, there we go, the content is being pushed. If I am on collapse mode in desktop and then go to mobile mode, it collapses back. Great. So now let's check this out if we have any hydration errors. So this seems to be not having any hydration errors for now, but I don't like the flickering on mobile mode. So let's go ahead and see if there is a way for us to improve this. So I'm going to go inside of the app folder, dashboard, components, sidebar, inside of the wrapper here. And in here, we already attempted to do something like that. Let's go ahead and give it one more try. So I'm going to give it a default value of 70 pixels. On large, it's going to be 60. And then inside of this collapse, I'm going to change this to also use the large. I'm just going to add a prefix for this to be large, like this. And let's see if that fixes the flickering. And it seems like it does, right? So when I go here and refresh, there's no flickering. If I go back here, there's no flickering either. Perfect. So exactly what we wanted from here. Great. And now what we have to do is we have to create our navigation. And this one is going to be a bit simpler because there is nothing to load. Usually we had to load our recommended users and stuff like that. But in this one, that's not the case. In this case, we just have the finished navigation hard-coded, right? So let's go inside of the index here and below the toggle add the navigation component. And now let's go ahead and create that component. So go inside of the sidebar and create a new file, navigation.tsx. Let's mark it as use client and let's export const navigation like this, and let's return a div navigation. Let's go back inside the sidebar index, and now you can import navigation, not from Lucid React, but from /navigation, and when you save, you should no longer be getting any errors, and instead in your desktop mode, you should see the navigation here, also on your mobile mode, but it should overflow like this. And now let's go ahead and let's actually create this. So I want to import a couple of stuff here. So let's import useUser from ClerkNext.js. Let's import usePathName from Next Navigation. And let's go ahead and let's import the following icons from Lucid React. So we need full screen, we need key round, we need message square, and we need users, like that. Now let's go ahead inside of the navigation here and let's write a path name to be usePathName. Let's extract the user from useUser. And now let's go ahead and let's render our routes, which is going to be an array of objects. So each array is going to have, each object is going to have a label. For this one, it's going to be stream. And the href for it is going to be dynamic. So open backticks /u and then user username, and make sure you use this ternary right here. And icon is going to be full screen like that. And now let's go ahead and copy and paste this, and the one below is going to be our keys, and that's going to lead to the exact same URL with /keys at the end, and it's going to use key route. Let's go ahead and copy that one as well. This one is going to be chat, and it's going to lead to /chat, and it's going to use the message square icon. Let's go ahead and open this again. And the last one is going to be community, which is going to lead to /community. And the icon is going to be users, which we already have imported. So there's 4 icons here. Great. And now that we have that, let's go ahead and let's change this from a div to an unordered list. And inside, I want to go ahead and do routes.map, get the individual route. And for now, let's just render a div with route.label and pass in the key to be route.href. Like this, and there we go. Now inside of our sidebar here, we should have stream, keys, chat, and community. So now let's go ahead and give this unordered list some styles. So I'm gonna give this a space y2, px2, pt4, and an lg pt0, like that. Great, so now it looks a bit spaced out. And now what we have to create is our nav item component, right? So we're gonna replace that with the nav item component. So let's go ahead and do that here. So nav item, let's go ahead and give it a key of route.href, like that. Let's go ahead and pass in the label from route.label. Let's pass in the icon from route.icon, href from route.href, and let's give it isActiveProp, which is going to be a simple comparison of path name and the route.href, so we know that we are on that page. And if you save, you should get an error because nav item does not exist. So let's go inside of the sidebar and create a new file, navitem.tsx, like this. Let's mark it as use client, and let's create an interface nav item props from here. Let's give it an icon to be a type of Lucid icon from Lucid React. Let's give it a label to be a string, an href to be a string, isActive to be a boolean, and let's export const nav item, and let's just assign this props here. So nav item props. Let's extract the icon, the label, the href, and isActive. And now let's go ahead and let's render this, right? So I also want to include the collapsed state from useCreator sidebar. So return the entire state here and make sure you imported the useCreator sidebar like this. And now we can dynamically render our button component. So make sure you import button from components UI button. And then let's go ahead and give this some attributes. So it's going to have as child attribute. The role, well, we don't need the role. The variant is going to be ghost. Class name is going to be dynamic, so make sure you import cn from libutils here. Let's go ahead and pass in some default classes, which are going to be full width and height of 12. And then if we are collapsed, justify center, otherwise justify start. And if we are active, in that case, BG accent. So it shows that we are currently on that page. Now inside of here, render a link component from next/link. So just make sure you add an import for that as well. Let's go ahead and let's pass in the href to be href prop. Let's create a div inside with a class name of flex item center and gap x4. Let's render the icon. And yeah, I didn't explain where we get the icon from. So we pass in the icon as a prop here, and the icon looks like this. So users full screen, right? So what we have to do is we have to turn this prop into an icon with a capital I, and we can do that by an alias. So let's go ahead and give it a colon and then icon with a capital I. And now we can use it as a component. So go inside and simply render that icon. And let's go ahead and give this some dynamic class names as well. So in here, write h-4 and w-4. And if we are collapsed, go ahead and give it a margin right of 0, otherwise a margin right of 2, like this. And then lastly, go ahead and write if we are not collapsed, only then also render the label inside of a span, like this. Great. So go back inside of the navigation and you can now import that from /nav item. So make sure you add this component and you should no longer be having any errors. As you can see, now we have a beautiful navigation here. It's collapsible and you can see how it looks on mobile. Without the toggle button, you can still access everything you need from here. Perfect. So it's very similar to what we had right here, right? But now it's here. But there is a loading state that we have to take care of here. And that is this state right here inside of our navigation component. So in here we have use user. But use user can either be the user or null, right? So that's because this use user hook from clerk has a loading state. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to go inside of the nav item and we're going to create a skeleton from it. So let's go ahead and let's write export const nav item skeleton here. And let's return a link element, a list element, and give it a class name of flex items center gap x4 px3 and py2. Let's add a skeleton component from components UI skeleton. So just make sure you add this import. All right, let's give this skeleton a class name of min height of 48 pixels and a min width of 48 pixels as well, and rounded medium. So that represents our icon, and then create a div with a class name of flex1, hidden on mobile but visible on desktop. And inside, render a smaller skeleton, which is simply gonna have a height of 6, like this. Great, and let's try it out now by going back inside of our navigation here. Before we render this, so make sure you're inside of the navigation component, we also need to check if the user has actually loaded. So we can do that by checking if we don't have user.username. In that case, let's go ahead and let's return an unordered list with a class name space y2. And let's go ahead and render array of 4 items dot map, skip the first one, get the index, and render nav item skeleton, which we just created, and give it the key of that index. So make sure you import nav item skeleton from /nav item. And now I don't even think if this is going to be visible. You can see actually it is visible. For a split second it is visible because that's the time it takes to load our user. And let's check this on mobile. And there we go. We have no hydration errors, it seems. Everything seems to be working fine. So we had some hydration errors here, looks like because of that suspense component, but in here we don't have it. At least for me, we don't. But then again, even if you're having it, I don't think it will break the page entirely. So I'm not having it. This seems to be working just fine. So great. This is going to be the end of this module. And what we're going to do next is create the actual stream model inside of our database. And then we're going to create the settings for all of these things inside. And then we're finally going to create our live stream page. Great job. So what I want to build now is the stream model. So let's go ahead inside of our Prisma schema right here. And let's go just below the user here. And let's create a model called stream. So model stream. Let's give it an ID of string, which is going to be our primary ID, and a default value of UUID. Let's go ahead and give this stream a name, which is also going to be db.text. Let's give it a thumbnail URL, which is going to be an optional string, and also it's going to be db.text, so you can have more characters than a regular string. And now let's go ahead and create an ingress ID here, which is going to be an optional string, and it's going to be unique. So this is going to be the ingress ID, which we're going to work on later, which we're going to use to connect to a streaming software. Let's also add a server URL, which is also going to come from the ingress creation, and that's going to be db.text. Let's create a stream key. So that's going to be a string, optional string as well, and db.text. And now let's create a couple of properties here. So I'm going to separate this. So these are the default name and thumbnail URL and ID. These three come from creating our ingress, which are going to be used for connecting to a streaming software. And now we're just going to have a bunch of options so we can control our stream, like enabling the chat, disabling the chat, and stuff like that. So let's write first is live. So that's going to be a Boolean with a default value of false, and it's going to change every time the user turns on a stream, and we're going to control that using a webhook later on. And now let's do is chat enabled. So that's going to be a Boolean as well with a default value of true. So by default, all chats are enabled for every new stream. And now let's add is chat delayed. That's going to be a Boolean, and a default value is going to be false. So the delay chat option is going to be used if the streamer wants to slow down the chat so they can read the messages more clearly. And now let's add is chat followers only. So that's going to be a Boolean with a default of false as well. And now we have to create a relation with the user that owns this stream. So let's create user ID to be a string and unique. And then let's create a relation user at relation fields user ID references ID and on delete cascade. And now let's go ahead inside of the user and let's create a relation with the stream. So go inside of the user here, and let's do this after this blocked stuff. Let's add a stream and make it optional like this. So a very simple relation like that. Great. Now let's go ahead and add a couple of more options to the stream model. So we're going to add created at, which is date time, and we're going to give it a default value of now. And let's do updated at, which is date time, with updated at decorator like this. And now let's create a couple of indexes. So let's add an index for the user ID. Let's add an index for the ingress ID. And let's do a full text here for the name, right? So I want the stream to be searchable, and let's make sure you do double at here. And right now I'm getting an error here. So what I have to do to enable full text search on the name of the stream model, I have to go inside of my generator client, and I have to add preview features and add full text search and full text index. But this is only for MySQL. So if you're doing this in PostgreSQL, I think you might not even need to add this, but you can try. You're gonna get errors if it doesn't work, right? And if you can't get it to work, just remove this line, right? We're gonna come to searching later, and it's not even that important for the entire project. But if you're using MySQL, make sure you add full text search and full text index. Great, so this should be our stream model here. And what I want to do now is I want to push that to our database. So let me just shut everything down here, and let me shut down everything and do npx prisma generate. So we add this locally, and then npx prisma db push, so we add that remotely. Right, so let's wait a second for this to push. There we go. And let's check our Prisma Studio now. So this should open on localhost 5555. Let's go inside of here. And when I click on the plus here, there we go. I have a stream model and the table is empty. None of these things exist right now. So what we have to do now is we have to create this stream every time a user is created. So we're going to do that inside of our app folder API webhooks clerk right here. So go ahead and find user.created, and after the image URL, go ahead and add a stream, create, and the only property we're going to fill, so if you look at the schema, the only required property for it should be the name. Everything else is optional, or it has a default value, meaning that we don't have to fill it, right? So let's go ahead and give this property a name to be open backticks, the user's name, which is payload.data.username, and then an apostrophe, so that user's stream. That's going to be the default name of the stream, right? And now, in order to synchronize this with our database, what we have to do is remove all users from our database and all users from Clerk. So this is what I'm going to do first. I'm going to go inside of my terminal here, and I will run npx prisma studio again. So I'm going to refresh this here. I'm going to go ahead and I will just delete everything. Here's an easy way to do it. So you can either do it manually by going into each block, by going into each follow, right, and deleting your models by selecting them like this. Or one more thing you can do is this. You can do npx prisma migrate reset. So this will shut down the entire database. I mean, reset the entire database. And you can see it says all data will be lost. So obviously only use this in development mode and confirm it like this. So this will reset the entire database for you like that. And after you do that, make sure you run npx prisma generate again, and then make sure you do npx prisma db push again. So it's quite important that you do that because the collections will now be updated again with the remote database. And now if you do npx prisma studio one more time here, you should be having no users, no blocks, no follows, no streams, nothing. Everything should be empty. But remember, we still have some stuff inside of our clerk. So let's visit clerk and let's remove everything from there as well. So go inside of your users here and go ahead and select the user and delete the user. And go ahead and do that twice. Like this. And now all users are empty. And if you take a look at your webhook, you should be getting some errors now because the webhook is trying to fire those events. So we just deleted a couple of users. And if I look at my activity, I think that now I should be having some failed attempts here, right? So we're going to see that once we start our webhook again, right? But you can just ignore that, because we know what's going on. We know that our users list is empty. We know that our database is empty. So we are now ready to start our webhook again. So we have to do the following. I will shut this down for now. And first thing I'm going to do is do npm run dev like this. And let's ensure that this is working. So I'm going to go ahead on localhost 3000 and I should be completely logged out. And I should be on the home page. It should be completely empty. So no users to recommend, nothing to search, and we can't even find anything on the home page, right? What we have to do now is open a new terminal and we have to run .ngrok command. So if you don't remember it, you can go to ngrok.com. Inside of your Cloud Edge, you have domains, and in here you have a little button which says start a tunnel, and in here you have your stable domain. You don't have to use it, of course, but it's the one that we have registered inside of our Clerk webhooks. Right here you can see that is that domain. So if you use that one, all you have to do is just paste that here, and of course change this port 80 to 3000 because that's where our app is running, right? Or if you don't have this domain for any reason, you can just do ngrok http 3000, and then you're gonna get this new URL. So then you have to copy that URL, you have to bring it back to Clerk here, and then you have to click edit here and just change this part of the URL with that thing we just copied, and make sure you add /API/webhooks/clerk at the end. So I'm not doing that. I'm gonna keep using this one, which I can again copy from here. So it's inside of Cloud Edge domains, click on start a tunnel and copy this command right here. And then I will just shut this down. I'm gonna paste that and I'm gonna replace the port to go to 3000 like that. And now if I go ahead and copy this and try it out inside of here, instead of localhost, I should see the exact same thing, and it looks like it's working great. So now my localhost and that domain is in sync, meaning that my webhook will work, and we have to test this out now because we just modified our webhook that when a user is created, we also create that new stream model which we just created in our Prisma schema. So go ahead and click login here and create a new account. I'm gonna go ahead and write my username, code with Antonio, and let's see if our webhook is going to work. So it looks like my user has been created, and let's go ahead now and I'm gonna open a third terminal here. So I have the npm run dev, I have my ngrok, and I'm running another one, npx Prisma Studio here. And that should show me that I have a user and a stream, and let's see if that is correct. And it is correct. I have one user right here. Let me just close this too. There we go. I have a user, and the user has a relation with the stream. So make sure that you have one user and make sure that you have one stream, and it should be called Code with Antonio's stream or whatever is the username of your user. Great. So now you can feel free to shut down Prisma Studio, and you also don't need ngrok anymore running unless you plan on creating new users. So here's what I actually recommend you do. Go ahead and run ngrok on that domain, right? Make sure that the proper domain is set in your Clerk webhook, and just go ahead and create a new user again. So I'm going to log out, and I'm going to create a new user just because it's going to be easier for us to test out different states during our development. So I logged in with a new user, and I'm going to name them Antonio. I'm going to click continue, and there we go. It seems to be working. And if I check my Prisma Studio again, which I shut down, so let me go back just to confirm that this also, so make sure you did this while you were running your webhook, right? If you accidentally mess it up, you can always do npx Prisma migrate reset, right? What we did recently, to delete your entire database, and then go into Clerk and remove your users manually. So you can always reset the entire thing, like no need to worry if you mess it up. So let's do npx Prisma Studio just to confirm that now I have another user and another stream. There we go, Antonio's stream, Code with Antonio's stream, and two users, I hope. Let's see, there we go, Antonio and Code with Antonio. Perfect, so we're back where we started, but this time our users have their stream model, which means that inside of our creator dashboard now, we're gonna be able to create these elements for keys, for chat, and for the community. Great, great job. So now that we've ensured that in our database we have a stream for each and every of one of our users, we are ready to create this page right here for when we click on chat. So right now when I click here, I get to a 404 because that page could not be found, and my URL is /u, the username of the currently logged in user, /chat, like that. So if yours is anything different, of course your username will be different, but you can go ahead and confirm that by going inside of the dashboard, username, sidebar, and in here you have a navigation component, and I believe that in here we defined our routes. So just confirm that your chat has the proper href to go to /u, the current username, and then /chat. And now what I want to do is I want to go inside of the username folder here, and just as we created this home folder, let's go ahead and let's create the chat folder like that. And then inside of chat, create page.tsx, and let's go ahead and do chat page, return a div, chat page, like this. And now if you go ahead and try and click on your chat again, you should be seeing chat page right here, and you can see my URL here at the top. Great, so let's go ahead and give this a proper title here. So I'm gonna go ahead and give this div a class name of padding 6, so everything is a bit indented. Now I'm gonna add a new div with a class name of flex items center, justify between, and margin bottom of 4. And then inside, I'm going to go ahead and render an h1 element, and I'm going to write chat settings. And I'm going to go ahead and give this a class name of text 2XL and font bold, like that. So a huge text which says chat settings like this. And we actually don't need these classes here, so we can just do a margin bottom of 4, like that. You can also put this class directly into the h1 element if you need it. So it's the same. Great. And what I want to do now is I want to create my stream service so that I can get the stream model from the database using the user ID. So let's go ahead and create the stream service. So go inside your lib folder and create a new file, stream-service.ts. And in here, let's go ahead and let's import our database. I'm just going to change the import to go to /lib. And then I'm going to export const get stream by user ID to be an asynchronous function which accepts the user ID and simply loads the stream using await db stream find unique, where we have a matching user ID, and then just return the stream. So this is going to work because in our schema here in the stream, we have a relation with the user ID, which is unique. So only one stream can exist per one user. So this will work with the find unique instance here. So now let's head back inside of our chat page. So app folder, dashboard, username, chat page. Let's go ahead and turn this into an asynchronous component. And first thing I want to do is I want to get self. So await get self from the auth service, and then get the stream using await get stream by user ID and pass in self.id, like that. And if we don't have a stream, we're gonna throw a new error here, stream not found, like that. Great. So if you have everything properly in your database, you should not be getting absolutely any error here. Instead, it should just load chat settings without any errors like it is on my screen. Great. So what we're going to do next is we're going to build a component called toggle card. So let's go ahead and first add one component which we're going to need from ShadCN, so you can actually shut down your webhook and grok. So I'm going to close everything, and I'm even going to shut down npm run dev. You don't have to do it, but I will shut it down and do npx ShadCN UI at latest add switch, like that. So that's one of the components we're going to need here. And now it's installing the switch component. Great. Let's do npm run dev again. Make sure you refresh your localhost so it's up to date. And we're now going to create toggles to change these properties of the stream model. So is chat enabled, is chat delayed, and is chat followers only. So we're going to create the functionality for that. So let's go inside of our chat page here, and outside of this div, which is wrapping the h1 element, let's create a new div like this. And inside of here, we're going to go ahead and give it a class name of space y4. And then we're going to render toggle card here. And we're going to be reusing this toggle card 3 times for each of our properties. So is chat enabled, is chat delayed, and is chat followers only, right? So we don't have to create 3 different components. Instead, we're going to create one reusable component, which is going to modify a specific field. So go ahead and give this a property field of is chat enabled. That's going to be the first one we're going to do. Let's give it a label of enable chat. And let's give it a default value of stream.isChatEnabled, and we load the stream from here. I made one mistake while I was developing this on my own. I wanted to use a property key for this. But remember, key is a reserved keyword in React, right? It's used when you do a map or an iteration over items, right? So key will not be passed as a prop inside of that component. You won't be able to access it. So just in case you're wondering why I chose the name field for this prop, so just make sure it's field, or if you're doing something else, make sure it's not key. Great, so now let's go ahead and create our toggle card component. So I'm gonna go inside of the chat here and create a new folder underscore components. And in here, I'm gonna create toggle-card.tsx, like that. And let's go ahead and mark this as use client, and let's export const toggle card and return a div toggle card. Now let's go back inside of the chat page, and now we can import the toggle card from /components toggle card. And when you save, you should no longer be getting any errors, and instead you should see the text which says toggle card just below the chat settings here. So let's go inside of the toggle card, and now we have to enable all of these props to be passed here. So I'm going to create an interface here, interface called toggle card props. I'm going to give it a label of string and a value of boolean. And for the field property, we're going to create a type. So type field types are going to be a couple of possibilities, and the possibilities are only going to be these 3. So is chat enabled? Then we're going to go ahead and use is chat delayed. And then we're going to go ahead and write is chat followers only. So that's going to be our field types, and then we can pass the field to be field types, like that. And then when you go ahead here and assign those props, so toggle card props, make sure you add this and go back inside of the page. You can see that in the future, when we write field, you can see how it will autocomplete to only control one of the 3 elements, because that's the only thing we enable for this component. So that's why we did this. We could have just passed a string, but this way we ensure type safety for our API, I mean our server action, which will receive this. Great, so let's go ahead and extract these fields. Let's extract the label. Let's give the value a default value of false, and let's extract the field like this. And now I'm going to go ahead and give this div a class name of rounded extra large, BG muted, and padding of 6. And inside of here, I'm going to go ahead and create a div with a class name, flex item center and justify between. And I'm going to go ahead and create a paragraph here which will render the label, and I'm going to give it a class name of font semi-bold and shrink 0. Great, and now below that I'm going to go ahead and create a div here with a class name of space y2, and inside I'm going to render my switch component. Make sure you import it from @/components UI switch like this, so don't import it from Radix. And inside of this component, I'm going to render a value, right? So if value is true, then it's going to say on, otherwise it's going to say off. And let's go ahead and give this a couple of properties. So I'm going to give it an check property of value for now. That's the only one we can give it now. And now, as you can see, we have a nice little toggle here, and we cannot click it yet, but we're going to go ahead and enable that in a second. So what I want to create now is the server action to actually update the stream. So let's go inside of our actions folder and create a new file, stream.ts. Let's mark this as use server. That's very important. And now let's go ahead and let's import revalidate path from next cache, and let's import database from /lib database. Let's import the stream from Prisma client, and I will just move it here at the top. And let's also import get self from a libauth service like this. And now export const update stream here to be an asynchronous function, which takes in the values and is going to use partial values of stream like that. And now let's go ahead and wrap this inside of a try and catch block, and let's throw new error, internal error in the catch. Great. And if we are inside of the try block, first let's attempt to get self using await get self. Then let's attempt to get self stream from await db stream find unique, or we could have used that lib which we created, but let's do it like this for now. And let's do user ID to be self.id. If we don't have self stream, it means there's nothing for us to update, so throw new error stream not found like that. And now let's go ahead and create valid data here. So name is going to be values.name, and we get values from our props here. And we know that it has name because we're using the stream model, but only partially. So only some values will be able to be updated here. And we're going to define which ones using this object. So name then is chat enabled, which is going to be values is chat enabled. Then is chat followers only is going to be values is chat followers only, and is chat delayed is going to be values is chat delayed. So just make sure that all of this are matching, right? Great. So these are the values which we're going to allow the user to update from the stream. And then let's simply do const stream to be await database stream update, where ID is self stream dot ID, and data is simply going to be a spread of valid data like this. And now let's revalidate a couple of paths here. So let's revalidate the path /u self.username/chat. Let's revalidate the username entirely, and let's also revalidate the home page where someone else will be looking at the stream. So those three, and simply let's return stream at the end. Great. So this is our update stream server action. You can, of course, always confirm your code with my GitHub if you're having any doubt. Now let's go back inside of my app folder, dashboard, username, chat, components, toggle card here. And let's go ahead and import a couple of stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and import host from Sonar. I'm going to go ahead and import use transition from React. And then I'm going to go ahead and import update stream from actions stream like this. And now let's create an onChange function here. So I'm going to write const onChange to be an asynchronous function. And let's go ahead and write start transition. And we actually don't need to make this asynchronous. So just a normal function, start transition inside, and let's do update stream. And we're going to update this specific field. So make sure you wrap it inside of square brackets, because this means the actual field, right? And you can see how it already throws an error here, because that's not part of the partial stream values, right? So let's go ahead and make sure that this is inside of square brackets, and then we write field, and then you can write stuff like this, and this is completely okay, because field can only be a part of is chat enabled, is chat delayed, or is chat followers only, which matches the partial of the stream because it has those three values right here. You can try, and if you go and write something else like ABC, you can see that we have an error because that's not part of the stream. Great, now let's go ahead and add .then here. And let's write toast.success chat settings updated. And let's do .catch toast.error something went wrong like that. And I just realized that I didn't tell you where I got this start transition from, so my apologies. Yes, there is a start transition from React, but that's not the one that I wanted to use. My apologies. So remove this for now, and instead go here and add const is pending and start transition. from use transition like this. My apologies. All right. And now let's go ahead and assign this onChange here to the switch element. So let's give it a property of onChecked change to be onChange. And let's also give it disabled of isPending like that. And now what I want to do is also open my terminal and run npx Prisma Studio here. So make sure this is running so you can see the result in the database. So refresh this. I'm going to open this in the new terminal. And in here I have two streams, right? So right now I'm logged in as Antonio, which means that the stream I'm looking at is Antonio's stream. And right now it says is chat enabled is true. So let's go ahead and click on this. And what should happen is this should turn off like this, and it says chat settings updated. And if I refresh my Prisma schema, I should be seeing that for Antonio's stream, is chat enabled is now false. Great. And now I should be able to turn it back on again. So now it's pending, and then when it gets updated and revalidated, it should go back to this one. I'm not really sure why is it not going back. So let's go ahead and see if we did. Oh, because we hard-coded this to false. My apologies. What we should hard-code it is to the opposite of the current value, like this in the onChange. My apologies for that. Let's try this again. When I click here now, there we go. Now we can switch between on and off. And one thing that I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and change this switch component to look a bit nicer because it's almost invisible when it's turned off. So let's go and close everything here. Let's go inside of our components UI switch component here. And in here, what I want to do is I want to change the colors a bit, right? So inside of this first one, switch primitives.root, I believe that we can control the color of checked by finding this data and then in square brackets state checked, and let's move it from BG primary to BG emerald 500 like that. And let's go ahead and change this one to not be BG input when it's unchecked, but instead be BG white /10 like this. And now what we have to do is we have to change the color of the thumb here as well. So let's go ahead and change this from using BG background to use BG primary like this. And there we go. Now our button looks much nicer. As you can see now, when I turn it off, it should be visible still. Let's go ahead and see why this is not working. So this is state unchecked here. And it looks like BG, oh, I wrote BG white, so it should just be BG white like this. And there we go. Now it's visible when it's off, and when I turn it on, it's back here again. Great. So now we can just easily copy and paste this component a couple of times for all of our other fields, right? So let's go back inside of our chat page. So app, dashboard, username, chat page here, and we can copy and paste this 2 times. So make sure you have 3 instances of this. The second one is going to be is chat delayed, and let's change this to be delay chat. And the last one is going to be is chat followers only, and this one is going to say must be following to chat like that. And let's go ahead and try this 3 out now. There we go. So we have enable chat. This works. Oh, it looks like it's not exactly working. Let's go ahead and see why. So is chat followers only, is chat delayed. Let's go ahead inside of the toggle card to debug why this is happening here. So we have our field property. And let's go ahead inside of the update stream action to see what's going on here. So we get the values. Is chat enabled, is chat followers only, is chat delayed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to console log the valid data here to see what's going on. So I'm going to open my terminal, and I'm going to be inside of where I'm running npm run dev to debug this. So it seems like whenever I turn 1 on, everything else seems to trigger as well, even though they explicitly get undefined. So I'm not sure why they're changing their values. So let me check inside of the actual database to see what's going on here. So in my Antonio's stream, is chat enabled is false, is chat delayed is false, and is chat followers only is false. Oh, okay. I think I know what's going on here. We can remove this console log here. It's because I don't pay attention. So go back inside of the chat page.tsx, and you can see that for the value, I use the exact same one instead of using the appropriate ones. So for this first one, it should be is chat enabled. For the second one, it should be is chat delayed. And for the last one, it should be is chat followers only. So make sure you modify the values of each and every one of them. Let's go ahead and refresh this. Let's try this again. When I click here, only that one is enabled. When I click here, only that one. And when I click here, only that one. And in my Prisma Studio, if I refresh now, all of the values for Antonio's stream, in my case, should be true, except of course is live. So is chat enabled true, is chat delayed true, and is chat followers only is true. Perfect, so this is working. What I want to create now is the loading skeleton for our toggle cards. So let's go ahead inside of the toggle card component here, and let's go ahead and let's import the skeleton. So go ahead and import skeleton from components UI skeleton, and then let's go to the bottom here and export const toggle card skeleton here, and very simply we're just going to return a skeleton component with a class name of rounded extra large, padding 10A, and width of full, like this. And now what I want to create is the loading page for our chat. So in here in the page, we call this two items. So we cannot wrap this page inside of suspense because it's in the root page. So what we can do is add loading.tsx, which is going to act as our suspense around the page. So create a new file on the same level as page called loading.tsx. And in here we have an error now. So we can quickly fix that by adding chat loading like this, and let's add a div loading like that. So make sure you do an export default. And now I think for a second, there we go, you can see how it says loading for a second here. And now we're going to replace that with our new placeholders. So let's go ahead and let's import the skeleton component from components UI skeleton, and let's also import toggle card skeleton from /components underscore components toggle card like this. And let's give this div a class name of padding 6 space y4. Let's go ahead and give this a skeleton component, which is going to represent the chat settings label, right? So let's give it an h10 and a width of 200 pixels. And then below that, open up a div with a class name of space y4 again, and render 3 instances of toggle card skeleton like that. And now our skeleton should look much better. So when I refresh here, well, it's very hard to see, but you can see how for a second there is a nice loading skeleton here, and it's especially visible when we go from one page to another. There we go. You can see how we have a nice loading state. Now it's cached, of course, so it's much faster. But if I refresh from here and then go here, there we go. You can see how we have a nice skeleton. Great. So now that we finished our chat settings here, what I want to do next is I want to go ahead and create our keys. So I'm going to leave the community for last. What's going to be inside of the community is an ability to unblock someone. But we're going to do that later because we have to create a whole table for that, right? So instead, I'm going to go ahead and create keys, which means that we are finally starting to create some ingresses here and some live stream connection. Great, great job. This marks the end of part 1 of this tutorial. Visit the link in the description to get to part 2, which is of course completely free, or simply go to my channel and find part 2 of Twitch Clone.